I think everyone's here who will be here, or can be here. I want to thank all of the citizens who've been so steadfast in coming out night after night and showing your concern for your neighborhood and your city. So I'll call the meeting to order and remind the speakers that there is no speaking time limit at public hearings, but in consideration of others waiting to speak, we require all speakers to limit their initial remarks to 5 minutes. If you require additional time for your comments, please request your name be placed at the bottom of the speakers list at the time you are finished speaking. And you will then be given an opportunity to complete your comments in 5-minute increments after all other registered speakers on the item have been heard. If you have already spoken but did not request your name be placed at the end of the list and now have something new to add, you will be allowed 2 minutes to speak to the second and final time. I would also remind speakers to keep comments pertinent to the merits of the rezoning application which is being considered. So, I think there are currently 11 speakers registered. And if we don't get through all the speakers and the applicant's team's summation this evening, we will recess and reconvene on Monday, April 14th, is it? 14th at 7:30 p.m. here in the council chambers. Can we have the roll call, please?
This is a reconvened special meeting of council for the purpose of holding a public hearing. Mayor Sullivan in the chair. Mayor Sullivan is present. Councillor Anton. Councillor Ball. Councillor Cadman is ineligible to participate this evening. Councillor Capri. Councillor Chow. Councillor Deal. Councillor Ladner.
Here.
Councillor Lee. And both Councillors Louie and Stevenson are ineligible to participate this evening. You have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, the clerk has already read the application from the previous meeting. So could you please read any additional correspondence that we received into the record?
Yes, we have received 74 additional letters in opposition for a total of 427 letters received in opposition since referral. We have received 4 letters in support since referral, and we have received 2 other letters since referral.
Okay. So we have, of course, we have Vicki Potter here, and we have Brian Bell. But we will continue to hear the public starting at speaker number 53, Margaret Burrell.
Good evening. I live in the Highcroft Towers, and I have lived there for 26 years. And I look on to the site that's about to be redeveloped. I call it the green belt. I've been told that legally it's not a green belt, but in fact, for our neighborhood, this is a green belt that goes for about 5 blocks. Trees that are 100 years old. I have a photograph of where it was cleared in 1907, and it's absolutely devastatingly dark. And now we have a green belt. I've been told that the trees are old and just bush and not valued or anything, and really they have to come down. However, I have lived there, as I said, for many years, and I've been through many storms, including the storm that was in Stanley Park, and we have not had a single tree from that avenue come by and come down. It's a solid bush area with trees of over 100 feet and 100 years old. So when we sort of tried to put this down as saying it was just bush and we can get rid of it and we'll put up 24 maple trees that will fill it in, that does not reflect what's going on. In fact, I find it's quite sort of inappropriate that while you, the council, are discussing this issue, that today and yesterday we had troops in there cutting the trees and limbing them, thinning them down, so that if you had decided to go and look at what our site was, you would see a marked difference in what we had already, we experienced on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis. Also, we've heard bandied about eco-density. I hosted the first meeting in our laundry room in the Highcroft Towers with the city staff. The first question I asked was, this development, which is dense, let's admit it's dense, is this part of eco-density? And I was told, no, it is not part of eco-density. So I think that debate should become off the table when we discuss these properties. We're talking about major change to our district that we've paid into and made a commitment to be in the Highcroft Towers and in that particular district. We're talking about huge development on an area to save one heritage house. This is not about saving heritage. This is about development. It's about profit. Why don't we get up front and just talk about it? It's not about the heritage of one particular house. This is about massive redevelopment, and it's going to set a precedent for the Shaughnessy area and the surrounding area that we live in. The University Women's Club have decided to remain neutral. It's easy to work out why they're remaining neutral, because they are planning, if you approve this proposal, the next proposal you'll have is to have the infill of the lands around the University Women's Club, and I can put money on that one. So that means the second part of our greenbelt is going. That greenbelt is incredibly valuable to the city of Vancouver, not only to the people who live in Highcroft and have invested in that district, but the people who come in every single day. There are 59,000 cars past 16th and Granville every day. You've got visitors that come down from the airport, and one of the treats of coming into Vancouver is we're different than driving into Toronto, and we're different than driving into Ottawa. You're coming into Vancouver, and you have this beautiful green avenue of Granville Street bringing you down into the city. The second thing is, it's a lung. You've got 59,000 cars, you've got our yield avenue there, and the cars are sitting there idling, waiting to go into the mainstream of the traffic. Those trees are the lungs for our area. The second thing is that they buffer the sound of the cars that come down 16th and Granville to Marple. This is a very important piece of real estate for the city. This kind of proposal is like our urban barbarianism.
You have 30 seconds.
My time is up?
30 seconds.
Pardon?
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, I really want the council to stop and think about what we're doing here. Heritage is very important, but heritage at this price, look at it, massive infill. And it's not about eco-density, because each single townhouse wants 4 parking spots. Tell me about the ecological value of 4 parking spots for each townhouse.
You have 2 questions. Councillor Capri.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very
Sorry,
much.
I'm a little hearing impaired at the moment through suffering from the cold, so could you speak up a little?
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. And actually, you raised something that reminded me I wanted to clarify a question to staff. So my question is actually to the staff.
Certainly.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
hi.
Thank you. The speaker raised the question of the University Women's Club potentially coming forward with an application. And I asked a question about the precedent at one of the earlier meetings, and I understood the answer to reflect the unique nature of this particular property, in that we looked at the map that showed there weren't any other properties that were really like that, and so there didn't seem to be a precedent. And then in a subsequent meeting, I heard the message that one council would not be bound by another council's decision, which did imply to me that there could be a bit of a ripple effect here. So can I get some clarification about what the answer is to the precedent question? Because it sounds like a bit of a contradiction. That's yeah and no.
Well, I think the answer to the precedent question, both of the things you just described are correct. Legally, you aren't bound by previous decisions you make when you consider subsequent rezonings. You consider them on their own merits, according to the policies in front of you at that time and the decision of council. Practically speaking, when staff brings a rezoning recommendation forward to you, we look at the basket of policies that apply to that site, to the input we've received from the neighbors, from the panels, etc., and bring you forward our best recommendation of how that all fits together. So when the question was asked, would staff ever recommend, if another rezoning came forward that had townhouses in it, like this in Shaughnessy, would staff only recommend it if it was on an arterial, on a large lot, near shopping, all the features that make this particularly unique? Would that be the new criteria? Our answer was, if today that came in and looking at the policies we have today, those would be important considerations. I can't say a year from now or 2 years from now what policies might be in place. I did want to say also specifically with regard to University Women's Club, that property is already legally designated. I believe they've already been through a rezoning so that heritage home heritage property is already secured. Okay, thank you.
And I have just one final point. The process for our community.
Okay.
Pardon?
You have one more question. Let's finish that first.
Oh, sorry.
Anton?
Thank you, and thank you for coming.
Sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing.
Okay, I'll try and speak up. What would you like to see happen to that property?
I think you need a compromise. I think you need to go back to the drawing board and look at what you can save and what can be developed in there for the developer. The developer bought the land, not for the heritage house, but to develop. I think you need to go back and look at what can you do so that that person is going to get a return for their investment.
I'll ask you a more specific question. You know that the property right at 16th and Burrard is a lot all by itself, like it's a separate... 16th and Granville, I'm sorry, is a separate property, and that could be developed right now with a single-family home on it. And is that what you would like to see?
Well, I tell you, I don't know it specifically. What I do think is that we need a better process so that the community gets involved in what goes in there. I facilitated the meeting at the Highcroft Towers and invited the city staff and the developers. The Shaughnessy residents organized one at the tennis club. We had one at the University Women's Club that was hosted by the city. None of us knew about it. We had no notice about it. And so we have not had what you would call a community discussion and input into what would be good for the land. You can't expect a developer not to want something out of the development. But we need to go back to the drawing board and see that this kind of stuff is not acceptable. And if we want to work as a community and save the greenbelt and save the developers' investment, then we should go back to the drawing board and sit down and look for community compromises, because there will need to be compromises, and look at to see how we can have a win-win situation from both sides, instead of this kind of imposing this on our district when we have not had true community consultation. The city has not hosted a consultation for the residents of Highcroft that are going to be the most directly affected. One half of our building looks onto this land.
Okay, I guess my question is, and maybe I'll ask the question to staff, given that that's a vacant building lot right now, or it doesn't have a park designation, is there any way that the city can keep it as a green belt, should we wish to do so?
By buying it.
By buying it.
Compensating the owner.
Yeah, okay. So we would have to buy it as the city then. Okay, thank you.
I mean, as I say, I'm here to look for a compromise so that we can have a win-win on both sides. So I'm not anti the development. I'm anti this kind of development, and I'm anti destroying a green belt that's part of our heritage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking the question.
Donna Aitken. We had a letter from Donna Aitken saying that Cyril Chan would speak.
Mayor Sullivan and council members and ladies and gentlemen, my name is Cyril Chan. I'm a resident of the First Shaughnessy area. Tonight I'm speaking on behalf of Donna Aitken, who cannot be here. The following is her presentation to council. Thank you for this opportunity to speak about the 1402 McRae development proposal. My name is Donna Aitken. I'm an interior designer specializing in renovating heritage homes in Vancouver. I'm very passionate about preserving the wonderful craftsmanship of architects and tradesmen of our past. My husband and I bought a heritage home in First Shaughnessy in November 2003. The home was on Pine Crescent. We liked the tree-lined street, the spacious lot, and the home was a good size of 6,600 square feet. This home was in fairly good condition structurally, but the home inspector did warn us that the plumbing and wiring were original. With this in mind, we set out renovating and restoring the heritage character of the home. This included replacing the stucco and insulation, stripping back many layers of paint, removing and repairing windows, upgrading bathrooms and kitchens, rewiring and replumbing. I also redesigned the home more in keeping with today's lifestyle. This included building a large patio for indoor and outdoor entertainment. Despite all the restoration work, my husband and I would much prefer to live in this classic heritage home than a brand new home of the same size, irrespective of price. There is something special about a heritage home that one cannot find in a newer home. We placed our property on the market in August 2007 after enjoying living in our new home for nearly 4 years. The home sold the day it went on the market for the asking price. We had been told by realtors that there was a shortage of fully renovated homes in Shaughnessy and that there was a big demand for our type of property. A house with the history of the nickel house would likely achieve a premium compared to a new home. I would like to say that in my experience, restoring a home to its original character is very desirable for present and future owners of First Shaughnessy properties. Therefore, I believe that retaining and restoring a heritage house with the caliber of the nickel house is a very viable opportunity, more so than tearing it down and building new. I urge you, therefore, to decline this application as it does not conform to the traditional character of the First Shaughnessy district, and let the developer restore the nickel house and build additional housing in accordance with the FSODP. Thank you.
Rochelle Vaticali. Rochelle Vaticali.
Hello, I'm Rochelle Battistelli. I'm a Canadian citizen, and I'm a resident of Tokyo and a property owner and part-time resident of Vancouver. I live at Highcroft Towers, and I'd like to speak briefly against the proposed development across the street from us. I'm really concerned. This is the second meeting that I've attended. I've been traveling and wasn't able to attend more, but I'm concerned that, in a way, the issues related to this proposed development have been perceived as a Shaughnessy issue, the issue of the heritage home and preserving the quality of that neighborhood. And I think that the impact on the greater community, the people in Highcroft Towers and the people that drive past and enjoy the benefits of the trees and the property and Shaughnessy as a community have been minimized. So that's a concern for me. I'm a bit stressed. At the last meeting that I was at, one of the council members, in response to a speaker, implied that should this property be developed anyway, because there is a free lot, that the trees could all just be cut down. And I think that was a bit of a misrepresentation. It's my understanding that even a developer or property owner needs to make an application to have trees removed from their property. So to blanketly say that the trees would be cut down anyway, I think is a bit of a misrepresentation. There's a process that needs to be gone through. You have to make an application. I understand for each tree over 8 inches in diameter. I don't think it is a foregone conclusion, and I think that given the opportunity to respond to all those trees being destroyed, that perhaps the citizens could influence the outcome of the application. I'm also a little bit worried, as the first speaker talked about, that this granting this development would be a slippery slope. And I mean, I look out my window and I see that property and I see the Highcroft University Women's Club property, and there are so many similarities. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to expect that there will be 16 townhouses there in the next few years. And I think that would be a real shame. I live in a city where trees have been sacrificed for density to a degree that it makes coping and living in that city really difficult. Vancouver is a beautiful place to live. Shaughnessy is a community that contributes to that beauty and to the livability of our city, and I think we have a chance to not go down the same path as other big cities have, and I think it's important to reconsider this development. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have a question based on something the Speaker said. I think it was me, actually, that said that about the trees, and so thank you for the opportunity to clarify whether I'm out to lunch on this one. So to the staff, can you clarify the situation with the trees and what the rule will be about protecting them if this is approved, or if the applicant can go forward under current guidelines? What's protected?
Yes. There are rules about tree cutting, and you're correct, 8 inches in diameter is sort of the benchmark. That's that rule pertains, you have to get a permit for that if you just want to take a tree out from your yard. When it's a redevelopment, those rules don't apply. So but the city always does seek to try to minimize removal of trees on a redevelopment site, and always asks typically, and certainly did in this situation, for an arborist report to identify trees that are healthy, mature, and can be integrated. So we would go so far as to have a project recommend it be redesigned around a particular tree if it was healthy and could be retained. As we've noted previous evenings, the arborist report for this particular property indicated many of the trees were of only poor to moderate health, and once you started removing a few, it endangers even more the health of the remaining trees. This particular development and a future development, perhaps under the existing ODP, if this wasn't approved, would not have to go and get a tree-by-tree permit to have them removed. They would present an overall design scheme that the city would assess similar to what it did with this one.
So is it safe to say that the question of the trees is somewhat of a non-issue whether you go forward with this application or not, because of the health of the trees, and there's no guarantee that they'd be preserved one way or the other?
I think that's fair to say. I mean, not knowing what a different application might look like under current zoning, say a single family residence on that site, but presumably they would want to build out 2 full floor area, right? So you'd be looking at a 12,000 or so square foot home on that, just the lower part of the lot, to fit that in with all the access and circulation, et cetera. Presumably you would be taking down trees in order to do that. Would every tree have to be taken down, as is mostly the case here? That would be speculating. But based on what we've heard through this arborist report, once you start removing any of these trees, you start endangering the others because of the health of the trees.
Okay, thank you. And that's why I made that comment, because that's what I had heard from previous meetings. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify.
Understand why they would remove trees if it was going to hurt the health of the other trees. And yet, anyway.
Councillor Anton?
Just on the University Women's Club, if I might just put this one to rest, because I think Ms. Potter did answer it, but perhaps, if I might, Ms. Potter, it was slightly cryptic. Okay. Could you just elaborate a little bit more about what you meant by your answer a moment ago?
What I meant by that is the reason why this proposal is before you tonight is because it's offering up legal designation of a significant heritage home. Without that, it is questionable whether there would be ample policy for staff to recommend approval of this. The Highcroft Women's Club has already been through this process, and that was the earlier, I believe they carved off part of their site and have townhouses there. The home is already legally designated, so I'm not sure exactly what they would bring to the table for a new rezoning to get even more.
So what you're saying is, if I'm interpreting you right, in terms of current policy, they wouldn't be able to come forward with an application like this.
I mean, I guess they could. Anybody can submit an application, but I don't know what the public benefit would be in that case.
Right, because there's a public benefit being offered up here, which is conservation of the home, and that's the trade-off. And that trade-off has already been done years ago on the Highcroft property, so they wouldn't be able to come back with a similar kind of offer. I think that's what our staff are saying. So they wouldn't be able to come back with this kind of application at University Women's Club.
Okay.
With that particular trade-off.
With that trade-off.
Okay, thank you very much. The next speaker, Madam Clerk, is it Eilish McKendy? Is that the next? Next page. Oh, Dorinda Scott.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, Mr. Mayor and Council, for allowing me the opportunity to be here. I'm sorry, my husband Barry and I were out of town at the previous hearing, so we weren't able to be here. I'm speaking against the proposed application. Barry and I reside at 1337 The Crescent in the immediate area of the proposed development. I'd like to read from a couple of letters that I'd already sent with some of the points that I'd like to make this evening. I feel very strongly that the 3238 Granville site should continue to remain zoned as FSD with the appropriate amount of development allowed within that zoning designation. We moved into our neighborhood appreciating the fact that the neighborhood does contain good examples of infill development that maintain the development principles outlined by the City of Vancouver Zone Guidelines. I feel that the above-mentioned development proposal of 1402 McRae and 3238 Granville does not. The neighborhood park, Shaughnessy Park, is enjoyed by hundreds of residents of Vancouver as well as many tourists. These people enjoy the beautiful trees, birds, and the opportunity to visit the neighborhood with a historical park and homes in the middle of an otherwise very busy South Granville neighborhood. Many residents of surrounding areas walk their dogs, bring their children, walk their children to school, walk and cycle to work at the various hospitals in the Oak Street area and the businesses in South Granville. And they enjoy the solitude of being able to enjoy the neighborhood, trees and park during their commutes. One of the reasons this is possible is because of the good quality in the park that's filtered by the mature trees occupying the 3238 Granville Street property. These trees act as a barrier to both the traffic noise and air pollution caused by the steady traffic flows along both Granville and 16th Avenues. Destroying these mature trees and doing such a large infill development will remove forever this barrier and open the neighborhood completely to the noise and pollution from which all Vancouver residents deserve the occasional reprieve. I ask that you please take into consideration the wishes of the residents of the area and who are overwhelmingly opposed to this level of development in the neighborhood and do not allow the development to go ahead as planned. Thank you.
Do you have a question, Councillor Anton?
Thank you. Thank you for coming back. What would you like to see there instead?
Well, as I say, there are lots of good examples in our First Shaughnessy district of infill developments. In fact, Barry and I live in an infill development of 4 properties on a large lot in First Shaughnessy. So I'm not opposed to the development as such, but I'm certainly opposed to the scale that's been proposed here.
Is it the site coverage that's troubling you, or the fact that it's townhouses?
No, it's the site coverage, it's the street facade, it's the increased amount of traffic in our neighborhood. I think First Shaughnessy has been very willing to accept a lot of today's city living activities, which include people commuting through our neighborhood to and from downtown for work, out of Vancouver residents from outlying areas coming through our neighborhoods and on a regular basis, filming that happens on a regular basis in the neighborhood, increased parking from merchants and residents in South Granville. Those things we've been willing to absorb, and that's part of living in the city of Vancouver. But certainly this type of development with 51 cars, I believe it's 51 or 52, parking for 51 cars in such a very constricted area is going to really increase the traffic in the neighborhood.
Maybe to staff, if I might, on the site coverage question. Can you just describe to us what the site coverage is here and what it could be if it was 3 single-family homes, what those 2 forms of development might look like in terms of site coverage?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, 35% site coverage is the rule in First Shaughnessy. 35%. I'm going to look over at Shannon. Is that right? I believe it's 35%. Let me just check one of my tables here. And this does not exceed that.
Or would it be 0.45?
I'm sorry. We're talking a different thing. 0.45 FSR. You're correct. Is what would be allowed under First Shaughnessy official development plan currently, and this application overall is 0.45. That is split up between let me just get my. So the two, after subdivision, there will be 2 lots. There'll be the heritage lot, we'll call it, and the CB1 lot. The heritage lot would end up being 0.23 FSR, and the CB1 site would be 0.63 FSR. For an overall, so basically you're shifting unused density from the heritage site down to the CD1 site. There is also another statistic or another regulation that the city regulates, and that's called the impermeable surface rules, and that is the percentage of the site that can have hard surface on it. And in First Shaughnessy, that is no more than 35%, and this application meets that as well.
And how would that compare to, say, for example, 3 single-family homes, which is one of the alternatives which is suggested from time to time?
Well, again, they couldn't exceed the 35% impermeable material rule either, and they could also have, under current rules, 0.45 FSR overall, as this one does. So presumably, what you would see under existing zoning would be the 3 separate lots that you have now. Each would have 0.45 on it, and that would be roughly maybe a 14,000 square feet of development that each could have.
And does that include garages and other outbuildings like that? Or are they extra to FSR?
They are included in FSR.
They're included in FSR.
So that would include garages. It would not include that you'd have probably more vehicle circulation if it was broken up in that way, because you'd have to have a separate access and driveways into each of it. So one of the advantages of having the parking underground and the single access point for all the development is you basically don't see any hard surface devoted to cars.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Chow. Continuing on the question that was posed by Councillor Anton. I think you're talking about force space ratio, the FSR, right?
Yes.
For the first Shaughnessy, that's 0.45.
That's right.
My own feeling, looking at the table in Appendix K, is that it seems like we are comparing something that is really not comparable, because in the first Shaughnessy district, the 0.45, with the stipulation that 2/3 of it may be above grade. But here, with the FSR for CD1, now all of it is actually above grade. So you're basically taking an average of those two are not really comparing the same thing. It's like comparing apple and oranges.
You're correct that in this application, one of the variances, if you will, from the current zoning, one of the departures from the first Shaughnessy zoning, is that all the FSR for the townhouse portion is above grade.
So technically speaking, it does not conform to the 0.45 SR of the first Shaughnessy district ODP, correct?
Not according to how the first Shaughnessy ODP is outlined, and we've highlighted that in the report.
Yeah. Okay. So the site coverage for CD1, what would that be in terms of percentage? Normally in our zoning bylaw.
I'm sorry.
The site coverage for CD1 zoning, like how many percent of the lot area?
It changes with every CD1.
I see. So that's okay.
Every CD1 is uniquely created.
It's different. Okay. So that's the key, is changing it to the CD1 zoning.
That's correct.
So the 35% site coverage is for the existing FSD zoning, right?
There's FSR, that's 0.45,
okay.
And there's site coverage is
coverage.
That's right. Site coverage is really more how much hard surface, the ratio between hard surface to landscape, and that is 35% in First Shaughnessy, and this application is within that 35%.
So hard surface, is that
driveways, impermeable surface, as they call it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Paul?
Just that parking has been mentioned a few times this evening, and I just wanted to confirm what I understood what staff to say earlier, was that the more parking had been put underground in order to get parking off the street, and that was in order to accommodate the desire of the neighborhood to not have so many people parking on the street. And I just wanted to make sure that my understanding was clear, that was in respect of the neighborhood.
And that is what the applicant put forward. So the applicant applied with 51 parking spaces with the rationale that one of the concerns that he had heard or was concerned that he would hear was the impact on using up parking spaces on the streets. And so that came as part of his rationale for that number of spaces. Council did raise at the referral meeting that issue, and staff did consider it, and we do have our engineering staff here tonight. I'll just reiterate what Mr. Memon has said previously, is that the traffic study indicated that the impact of the actual driving around of those cars would be insignificant, and we typically don't regulate an upper limit in multiple dwellings. We have a minimum requirement, which this application more than meets, but we don't set an upper limit, and have not set one in this instance.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Alan Forrester.
Mayor Sullivan, Council, my name is Alan Forrester, and I don't live in Shaughnessy. I drive by it almost every day. And I just wanted to make a few points from my point of view. Increasing density along arterials, obviously 16th and Granville, I think makes sense. Putting increased density along the edge of a neighborhood on the arterial in walking distance to transit, shopping, and restaurants, and great transit, and great shopping and great restaurants at that. In my opinion, it just makes sense. It reduces the need to drive. It's good for the environment. Gets people out walking. If we were talking about putting towers or townhomes or something like that in the middle of Shaughnessy, no one, regardless of where they live, I think would agree with that. But densifying along the edge of all neighborhoods, and Shaughnessy included, again, in my opinion, makes sense. I think the Vancouver regional planning estimates about 1 million people coming here in the next 20 years, 25 years, whatever it is. A lot of people are coming here. It's a desirable place, and people might like that or they might hate it, but Vancouver is a popular place. And all neighborhoods are going to have to densify. Doesn't matter what council's in place. Doesn't matter what party. I don't think. I think Shaughnessy is included in that, and in my neighborhood where I live is going to densify, and I'll probably have a SkyTrain station close to my neighborhood or close to my house. I would rather not, but I'm going to have to live with that. And I think saving the old character house makes a lot of sense as well. I think there's, in my opinion, way too much parking in this particular development. Those are my opinions. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker is Charles Hillman.
Mayor Sullivan and Council, Charles Hillman, and a resident of Vancouver for the past 50 years. And I simply want to endorse the speakers who've already spoken so that the place will be like this for another 50 years at least. I'd like to add one little additional point to it. Apart from the destroying of that wonderful Baby Stanley Park, which is a forested area, and we're talking about green space all the time, and here we're going to cut it down. So I'm certainly opposed to that. The other thing that I want to say is the traffic. Now, most intersections are a two-street intersection. This one down here happens to be a four-street intersection. And McRae, Granville, 16th, and the one I live on, I've forgotten. Anyway, it's just too much. It's a speedway along McRae here, and so I'd like to add that to the decision, and I hope the council doesn't make, shall we say, a practical decision here, but an emotional one, because Shaughnessy has got to be preserved. Thank you.
Okay, next we are going to speakers who have spoken once and who want to speak again. The first speaker is Greg Moe.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council, fellow hearing attendees. My name is Greg Moe, and my wife and I are the developers and the resident owners of the Greencroft Heritage A residence. On February 14th, I spoke briefly and rushedly about one of several major discrepancies that were clearly evident to me in respect of the financial compensation scheme that the city staff were prepared to offer the current proponent versus the financial compensation scheme that the city provided for the preservation of the Greencroft Heritage A residence. I further pointed out to council that I was uniquely qualified to provide this information. At the time of the second evening of the public hearing, my wife and I were traveling. However, it was pointed out to me by others in attendance that evening that a question was raised by a member of council as to whether city staff knew if the current McRae proposal was being evaluated to determine the required magnitude of compensation and to translate that into the number of townhouses required for compensation on the same basis as occurred with the Greencroft proposal, which was the most recent Heritage A residence that was saved and restored under the city's expressed policy for retention. I was advised that city staff were not, at that time, able to provide a complete answer to that hugely important question. But fortunately, I can. Before I point out the fundamentals of this answer and as background for their understanding, I need to provide some context. Mr. Richard Wood, who you heard from on the 14th of February, has been extremely diligent in trying to assist Council to understand the critical importance of an open book policy when it comes to financial calculations related to compensatory schemes for heritage designation. Further to this, he has spearheaded a time-consuming and a costly effort to have a professional quantity survey firm duplicate the financial performance of the developer and city for the currently proposed scheme. The survey firm has done this faithfully and in a manner consistent with all their past modeling work that has been accepted by city staff. Further to this, they've even used several of the key input valuations of the developer, which valuations Council had directed that the city staff share with leaders of this group opposing the development scheme. At the hearings on the 10th of March, we heard in person from the head of the quantity survey firm BTY, who substantiated that his firm's model gave a very similar but slightly more conservative results in the city's pro forma, that is a requirement of 15 versus 16 additional townhouse titles, respectively, to compensate the applicant. I've reviewed all these parameters in the quantity survey firm's report and would like to draw the relevant comparisons as to what this applicant is being offered vis-a-vis what the Greencroft scheme was offered for the redevelopment and conservation of that Heritage A residence. And when I say offered, what I really mean to say is that the city said to us at the time, here's what we are prepared to consider, and it is take it or leave it. There was no room for negotiation, and we were not asking for a spot rezoning, but rather only some relaxations from the first Shaughnessy ODP. Let me enumerate. The McRae proposal incorporates 3% of construction costs to pay for the developer's overhead, whereas the Greencroft proposal received no such provision. The McRae proposal incorporates loan interest costs calculated to include the developer's management and overhead costs, whereas the Greencroft proposal received no such provision. The McRae proposal incorporates 3 years of landholding in the calculation for loan interest costs, whereas the Greencroft proposal received only a 2-year provision. The McRae proposal incorporates a contingency of 20% added to loan interest costs, whereas the Greencroft proposal received no such provision. The McRae proposal incorporates a contingency of 5% added to non-construction costs, whereas the Greencroft proposal received no such provision. The McRae proposal incorporates an allowed developer profit of 15% on all costs, whereas the Greencroft proposal received an allowance of only 12%. The city allowed the Greencroft proposal a maximum of $195 per square foot, excluding land costs and interest costs, for the restoration costs on the Heritage A residence. The actual cost ended up at $338 per square foot, and this is only to restore it to the way it looked before falling into disrepair, nothing lavish. Comparatively, it appears that the city are accepting the McRae developer's costs without contention or setting conservative caps thereon. In pointing out these comparative giveaways to this developer, it's likely that they would be viewed as by unbiased parties as excessive padding of the numbers in favor of the applicant. 30 seconds. What this translates into is hundreds of thousands of dollars of excess of profit being given away to this developer that was not consistently made available to the last approved Heritage A restoration. What this also translates into is giving inappropriate credence to the need for extra townhouse titles to this developer, without any explanation as to how the city's developer compensation policies changed. In the interest of time, I'm going to conclude there, but I would like to come back as I do have more to say at a later opportunity this evening.
Okay. Anthony Hunt.
I have a question, Your Worship.
Oh, sorry, question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question to staff based on those numbers. I wanted to stop and say, is that true? Is that true? Can you explain that one? So can you give me a walkthrough of the apparent discrepancy?
The Speaker mentioned a lot of different things, obviously. No single development is the same. The hard and soft costs of development would have been the same as Greencroft. He mentioned various percentages for overhead and these kind of things. That would have all been included in the analysis that we've done for this project. The developer's profit may have varied slightly from what's being used now. It is reflective of the market at the time and is reflective of the negotiation at that time.
Have we become softer negotiators?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Okay, so then it's things like market influence, and I'm just trying to think about what the drivers would be that would create that apparent imbalance?
Well, it's very much market forces for the form of development. For example, developers' profit is driven by the current acceptable level of profit that a typical developer would ascribe for a particular development. So that may vary over time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Chow.
Thank you, Ms. Moe. I just didn't catch your cost figures for restoration costs, that $195 per square foot versus $338. Can you please explain that? What were you trying to say there? The restoration costs?
Well, what I was saying was that although the gentleman from the city sort of indicated that there is negotiation and the negotiation varies over time, the reality of what occurred is, for us, there was no negotiation. There was none at all. I repeat, it was take it or leave it. What we were allowed in our pro formas was $195 per square foot to do the restoration, nothing more. And in reality, after having completed the project fully and done all the numbers, the reality was it was $338 a square foot.
Okay, so for staff, how much are we allowing for restoration of the present house in terms of per square foot?
On a per square foot basis?
Yes.
It is approximately, at the time we originally did the analysis in 2006, hard costs were around about $75, $80 per square foot of the size of the house. It is a completely different form of restoration than Greencroft. There's no changes internally to the building. Greencroft was basically the building was split into two. The existing heritage building and two infill houses were put in on the site. It is completely different in 1402 McRae, where there are extensive landscape works and improvements around in the landscaping, but very little relating to the house itself.
So the figure is only $75 to $80 per square foot? I guess that doesn't really tell anything then. In total, it was around, in hard costs at the time, it was around about $800,000. That was in 2006. In hard costs now, we estimated it just over $1 million. So that would be $1 million that's required to restore this house right now.
Well, it's required to do the heritage restoration relating to this HRA, which primarily is to do with the landscaping and relocation of the garage.
Okay, so yeah, I'm kind of at a loss here. Whereas the Greencroft, Mr. Moe, you're saying about $195 per square foot that was allowed, but you spent $338, right, per square foot. But you may have a different area of site or house, much smaller house, or?
No, actually, the house was larger, but the scope of the required restoration was more significant.
Okay.
I introduced those figures sort of to indicate the position that the city had taken with our development, the very, very firm hand and firm line, and that the whole point of, I think, that information was to try to indicate that there has to be some sort of a limit and a cap on the position and the stance that the city takes with what is fair compensation, because that ultimately is driving a lot of the discontent of the opposing stakeholders to this application. But I will have a lot more to speak to, and even more important issues that are pretty much related to that when I have an opportunity to return.
So perhaps you could send us your notes or your speech to council?
Maybe we could have that discussion when I'm complete, and I'd be happy to consider doing that.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony Hunt.
Your Worship, members of council, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Anthony Hunt, and I've lived in and around the first Shaughnessy area for over 50 years. I am opposed to this rezoning application, and I would like to quote 5 lines from the bylaw 5546, which was passed by the city in 1982.
And to my knowledge, there have been no rezoning of any of the Shaughnessy lands since that date. And I think this bylaw was passed precisely to try to avoid that in the future. Okay, Bylaw 546, the first Shaughnessy Official Development Plan. The Official Development Plan is intended to control and guide development in that part of the City of Vancouver which is zoned First Shaughnessy District. This plan should be reviewed from time to time to ensure that it accurately reflects community and city goals. Number 2. The plan is to limit further subdivision to protect the character of the area, to discourage commuter and through traffic. And despite what the traffic engineer says, everybody knows that any traffic coming out of this development would have to turn right and go into the old Shaughnessy district. To provide residents and property owners an opportunity to continue their participation in the planning and development of the area. Number 3. The objective of this plan is to protect and preserve Shaughnessy's unique pre-1940 character. First Shaughnessy is intended to remain a low-density residential area and is predominantly single-family in character, and to discourage further subdivision in the area. Number 4. All buildings should be complementary in architectural style and subordinate in size to the principal building on the site. Number 5. New development should strive to create an estate image character. Now, the preamble to this bylaw says that the Director of Planning may relax any of the regulations. But this is a flimsy basis on which to support rezoning for the benefit of private interests. And I believe that the Land Title Office would have great difficulty in registering a plan such as this when it absolutely conflicts with the bylaw 5546, which is presently in existence. And there's no provision in the bylaw which permits rezoning. I'm grateful to Councillor Anton for proposing that these public hearings take place. I would recommend that the City consider an amendment to Bylaw 5546 to prohibit rezoning of the First Shaughnessy lands without a full and broadly based public hearing. I realize that Council have many complex issues to vote on, and there's a tendency for over-reliance on staff. But extreme vigilance is absolutely necessary to avoid inappropriate rezoning. The preservation and protection under this bylaw does not include rezoning, and this application violates the intent of the bylaw. The Nickel House is nothing more than a pawn used to justify a high-density development in violation of the bylaw. Preservation of the Nickel House is not contingent on rezoning. The owner has other options to preserve the house and to retain the integrity of the First Shaughnessy lands. Rezoning in this case, as proposed, would represent a massive transfer of wealth without serving the city. There is no shortage of multi-million-dollar homes in Vancouver at this time. The proposal would set a dangerous precedent and set in motion other land assemblies on the fringes of the First Shaughnessy lands, leading to further applications for rezoning. We cannot afford further erosion of the First Shaughnessy lands by ill-devised schemes. And I would like to refer you to another infill scheme at the corner of Matthews and Selkirk, where the Rosemary House estate is subject to an infill development. And if you drive by and look at what's going on there, and it has been going on for the last 4 or 5 years, it is an absolute disaster. This also raises in my mind the need for performance bonds for developments of this type. The citizens of Vancouver rely on our council to be the guardians and the protectors of the First Shaughnessy lands. They are a unique heritage part of the city. And I would ask all of the council to reject this rezoning application. I have two suggestions to offer.
Summarize.
Staff have said that the Lot 1 has a market value of $2 million. I would suggest the city could seriously consider making an offer to the owner of that lot to purchase it for $2 million and lock it up for all time. My second suggestion is, if the owner of that wishes to be philanthropic, perhaps he would like to donate Lot 1 to the city, and we could call it Bell Park.
Councillor Anton?
Yes. Sorry, I don't have the speaker's name, Your Worship. Or Mr. Hunt. Yes, I do have the name. Thank you for giving me credit, but I think you were giving credit where credit was not due.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was referring to the fact that your name showed up as being the mover of the public hearing.
I think that was pretty much a pro forma motion,
and
okay. You might give me credit for other things,
You're good anyway.
But not for that. Thank you. On to slightly more serious matters. The ODP that you're looking at has had a number of amendments to it. I just want to make sure you're looking at the one that was amended. I think the most recent amendments were 1998. That's, if I might ask our staff, that's what I'm looking at.
Are we talking about an amendment to it
or
rezoning application?
Were you looking at the first Shaughnessy official development plan?
Yes.
And the most recent amendments to that or consolidation was April 1998. Am I right about that?
I have a December 1998.
Oh, you've got even...
My reference was...
December 1998, yes. I just want to make sure, Mr. Hunt...
to carving out any more land from the first Shaughnessy.
I just wanted to make sure you're looking at the same document that I'm looking at. It's actually the most recent amendment on the bottom right corner of the front says December 1998. Is that the one you're looking at?
No. I'm only looking at the bylaw 5546.
Yeah, it's the same one.
Yes.
But it's got an amend. It's been amended, I think, over the years. I just want to make sure you're looking at the same document.
What's the date? This one is dated April 1998. The one that I'm referring to.
All right, then that's the same.
Is that okay?
I just wanted to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Clapworthy. On the, I thought only councillors got into the nitty-gritty of what bylaws say. Just on the technical issue that Mr. Hunt raises in terms of can something come out of a bylaw, can staff just help with that question that's been raised, please?
Well, council can amend these bylaws at any time. That's not what's before you tonight. There's not a proposal before you tonight to amend the official development plan. There's a proposal before you tonight to consider taking a piece of property out of the first Shaughnessy zone and creating a different zoning for it. Because by nature, rezonings don't follow the plan that they're in. If it's a downtown rezoning, the reason it has to be rezoned is because it doesn't meet the downtown official development plan. Similarly here, that's the reason this has to be rezoned. So you can change the ODP and you can rezone other properties.
And does that cause any difficulty with the Land Title Office then?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
My reference to the Land Title Office is the fact that I believe a bylaw is a bylaw is a bylaw. And unless you amend this bylaw, this application to take a chunk of land out of that protected area is in conflict with the bylaw. And I can't see how the Land Title Office could register something that's in conflict with the bylaw on the books.
Can I ask you another question, Mr. Hunt? What would you, I know that you've suggested the city buy that corner lot, but in the absence of that, what would you like to see there?
I would like to, if those two suggestions don't fly, then I would like to see the land subject to this existing bylaw, which means that on that lot there's room for one single-family residence. Also, you could change the lot line to permit another single-family residence behind the Nickel House and move the Nickel House further towards the Crescent.
You'd like to see the original house moved?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And that house could be stratted.
I have another question for. I guess on these bylaws, when you read through them, they say lots of different things in different paragraphs. And there is one that I was looking at it again tonight myself because there's no question this is a very tricky issue, which is we're dealing with right now and that you're speaking to.
Yeah.
And I was kind of interested in the many things that have been mentioned during the course of this hearing, but another piece caught my eye, which I hadn't even noticed before, which it says to reinforce the economic stability through a controlled increase in density. I just wonder what that means to you, Mr. Hunt, because you must have read that.
Yes, I think that refers to the infill provisions. There are certain areas and certain lots within the Shaughnessy lands where it is appropriate to permit some infill to increase the density.
But not here?
Pardon?
Not here, though.
Well, it could. You could receive an application for an infill, yes.
But you don't see this as being an application for an infill, then?
No, this is to confiscate something. And to put about $8 million into some private hands from the city's hands. That's what it's to do. That's what rezoning is all about. That's how you make developers rich.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Richard Wood? No. Phil Yacht. Phil Yacht? Okay. William Bronstein.
Your Worship, Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to continue on what was said the other night. I had left off where we were discussing the area of Highcroft Towers, which provides only 1/3 parking for all the condominium owners. 1/3 is what they provide. University Women's Club has very limited parking. The Nickel property has had very low maintenance over the past years, as the owner has been incapacitated and the family did not want to create any form of discomfort for her with the gardeners, tradespeople, etc. We need to ask the vocal critics, who will probably continue their fear-mongering rhetoric to council, that by allowing this development to proceed, it will create a stampede for others. Most public meetings about development in the city only attract the complainers. Few, however, come out to a public meeting to contribute constructively or to offer positive support for a well-planned growth. Without harming the character of the neighborhood, and with my many, many years of working in the first Shaughnessy design panel and the board, let me assure you, there is no other property that qualifies as the Nickel Estate does. There will be no stampede. There will not be a threat to a change in direction or an upheaval in the way we live. To some of us, this may be our home of the future. These new homes to be created are of the highest of quality and will be desired by international demand from many people from around the world, and their desirability of Vancouver as a second or third home that is usually left empty for most of the year. The other night someone spoke of peace and tranquility in Shaughnessy for their families with barbecues and family outings in the rear yard. 99% of the great Shaughnessy heritage homes do not have a backyard. They have 10 feet maximum. So I don't know where all this truth comes from. These were created to create a facade to allow these magnificent Shaughnessy mansions to look as if they had great gardens all around the property. I have had the opportunity in the past to work with Mr. Bell. He has created many quality projects, and he has received numerous compliments. And he's been found to be most approachable, whether it be a criticism or otherwise, and he has been most responsive to all. As a concerned homeowner, I would certainly recommend acceptance of this proposal, which will almost definitely enhance and clean up one of the many entrances to First Shaughnessy. There will be 43% more trees, landscaping, and additional underground parking. Thank you to the city staff on a well-done presentation and in their correctness in all matters, and a hopeful conclusion for this site. And again, thank you for allowing me to correct some of the many, many interpreted views that have been put forth in order to obtain a negative opinion to the council members. We can disagree Without being disagreeable, let's move ahead. Thank you.
You have a question? Councillor Lee? Oh, no. No question. Okay. Angela Wu. Angela Wu? No. Gilda Mahabir.
Mayor and members of council, I spoke at the last meeting and asked for this opportunity to speak again. To remind you, my name is Gilda Mahabir and I live in the single-family home at 1511 Marpole Avenue, and I'm considered a significant neighbor. We are just across the street on Granville, on the opposite side of this proposed development, and I am strongly opposed to it, as I hopefully got across to you at the last meeting. Anyway, a few further points I wanted to speak to. The first night we heard Mr. Bell said, among other things, that the neighbors were here out of fear of the unknown. I can assure you and Mr. Bell that it is not for fear of the unknown that we are here, but rather because of fear of the known. We know the ramifications of what these developments mean to our neighborhood, as we have borne witness to its slow and insidious demise by various past developments. It is destruction in small increments. First, you subdivide large lots into smaller lots, then those lots into smaller ones yet. Then you strata the large homes. Then you allow one infill, then you allow two infills. Then you have strata houses with the infills. Now we're going for townhouses. Next, perhaps it'll be apartments. Soon we won't have any estate-like character homes or properties left in Shaughnessy. It is this kind of destruction, if this kind of destruction is allowed to continue. It kind of reminds me of David Suzuki's analogy using frogs, where what he says is if you put a frog in water and slowly increase the temperature to boiling, the frog just stays in the water and eventually dies. However, if you put a frog directly into that boiling water, it will immediately jump out. I believe you are slowly killing our neighborhood by allowing these types of proposals to be considered, let alone allowed. As a citizen, I don't want to wait for the boil, and I hope you don't either. Mr. Bell said that he feels well supported by city staff. Well, we, the public, certainly don't feel well supported at all by city staff. Quite the opposite. What does that tell you? Mr. Molnar and a few other people came forward to also speak about the fact that these townhouses would be very welcome to this neighborhood, as it would give them or their older parents a chance to live in this neighborhood, as Shaughnessy doesn't offer much diversity and choice of type of accommodation from their point of view. To me, this is a nonsensical argument on many fronts. First of all, Shaughnessy is mostly zoned a single-family residence, as the downtown is mostly zoned high density. Secondly, there are lots of options of living in this area, as many have has previously mentioned. Thirdly, if this argument holds, then I could say, well, gee, I sure would love to live in the downtown area, but you know, there are no single-family houses available for me, so perhaps you guys should rezone some of those large lots down there, and for single-family houses at $250 a square foot, so I can have the opportunity of living in the kind of place I'd like to live in downtown. Now that's bizarre. Okay? Some speakers have spoken about boundaries, and that we have boundaries as they serve a purpose of defining what is within it. We keep hearing that this land is on the edge of First Shaughnessy. Yes, but it still is in First Shaughnessy. A boundary is just that. It is a boundary, and don't mess with it. Boundaries are meant to protect what is contained within it. Some people mentioned about the green space, and I was thinking my big vision would be, and my big dream would be, if you could have the vision that the council seemed to have in the 60s and 70s, when they looked at Point Grey Road, and as houses came up along that road, they bought up that land. And today what you have is those lovely little viewpoints along Point Grey Road where we, the public, can actually see the ocean. And, I mean, if you could possibly have money to save this green belt, that would be wonderful. Anyway, before I close, I need to speak about this so-called public process. We've heard from several staff how open and inclusive it was. But we are the public, and we have been telling you repeatedly that it was not. Who are you going to believe? Complaints of how flawed your public process is a complaint that is heard from all neighbourhoods on an ongoing basis. Something is dreadfully wrong if the public consistently feels pushed aside, ignored, and if included, only given very select information. You must insist on better. Now, you all get to vote on whether to pass this rezoning application or not.
Please summarize.
Okay, but I want to remind you that we also get our chance to vote at election time. The last time I stood here before council was to oppose Rapid Bus and Greencroft, both of which were passed against overwhelmingly strong opposition. So I have no illusions how this will go. But I do know how things went for that municipal government at election time. When people lose faith in their leadership, there is a problem. I encourage you all to be brave, like our Environment Minister, Barry Penner, who stood up for what is right and said no to that proposal of the forest project. And I please encourage you to say no to this proposal also. Thank you.
Sorry, I just can't resist asking a question. Do you think that the rapid bus is a mistake?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Next speaker is Harrison Cito.
Your Mayor, councillors, I'll just refresh your memory that I would ask the council to not accept this application, to rather follow the infill suggestion to build some infills on the current lot 2A, to leave lot 1, 3238 Granville, untouched, undeveloped. And the question was asked, how could that happen? And some suggestions about the city buying it or the developer donating it. And I also proposed that there's the other alternative of donating it to a land conservancy agent organization for tax benefit. So part of the issue for me is what is important. What is important? It seems like there's been some economic compensation for this very experienced veteran developer who's been developing for decades and who most likely doesn't need the money. What is important? I'd like to read a poem by Mary Oliver to put what is important in some framework. When Death Comes by Mary Oliver. When death comes like a hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from this purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measlepox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does towards silence. And each body a line of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms, And when it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. So we live our life, and we're conditioned by our society. Our society is a society based on colonialism, conquer and take over. So we're used to that. All of us are used to that. We've been ingrained in that. So that likewise, that same kind of colonialism is operating here in terms of this lot, this building lot. When I hear it's referred to as a building lot, kind of I think, no, it's much more than a building lot. I do have more to say, Mayor, so if I could be placed on the end again.
About 1 minute. Or
yes, but I just want to say that now. So when is enough is one of the issues I feel is important. And when we don't know the answer to that question, then we're going to go searching, consuming, buying, because we don't know the answer to when it's enough. Is it enough that I've made my millions? Is it enough that I provided housing to what I think would be good for the people? There's that MasterCard commercial where they have people going up and they pay something. So, for example, let's think of...
Maybe we should do that commercial after.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes. Okay. It seems, do we have... Let me see. Down to 66. Okay, Eilish McKendy. Eilish McKendy.
Mayor and councillors, I spoke before at the last meeting when it's the first time I ever got any material on this project. Anyway, I think that this zoning, we could preserve this land by not destroying trees and not building townhouses. And what I envision as a compromise, I don't know why we seem to have to sort of defer to a developer who's making money hand over fist, but anyway, is that why can't we preserve the nickel house, which could be made into 4 units, I believe, and then have 2 other single-family dwellings. I'm also being given to understand, and I'm not sure this is correct, but the nickel house has not been designated heritage. And so I don't know why this heritage bit keeps coming up. Now, perhaps the staff could enlighten me on this.
Is it appropriate for me to answer that?
Are you finished then?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So staff would like
Do you want me to answer the question about... So you're correct that the nickel house has not yet been designated. It is on the Heritage Register as an A-listed. So through this process, it would be designated, which would then protect it from ever being able to be demolished. It's sort of the public benefit being offered here.
But it would be benefited. If it was designated, it's only if this project goes through, all these townhouses.
That's correct. That's what's on the table now, is the offer of restoring and designating the house in exchange for rezoning that would offer the rest of the project. That's correct.
I said, well, I'm dead against that.
Councillor Chow.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question to Ms. Porter. So, Ms. McKenzie talked about 2 infill houses. How many are you allowed under the existing FSD in terms of infill?
Under the existing FSD, by our calculations, the upper 2 lots could have 4 infills or 2 duplex infills, so 4 units separate. 4 units within the multiple conversion dwelling, so you could convert the nickel house into 4 units. 4 units of infill, plus a single-family residence down on the lower lot, for a total of 9 units.
9 units.
That's correct.
But in terms of building, it will be 2, 3, 4 buildings, right? You got 2 duplexes.
That's
right?
correct.
And you have the existing house that could turn into a multi-family, and then 1 single house. Right?
And a single house
yes.
down.
Okay, thank you.
But that option, from our calculations, is not a fair compensation. It's not financially viable to compensate the developer for what he could get by demolishing the nickel house and doing 3 large mansions.
Mm-hmm. But I guess we're hampered by the fact that the density is not transferred out of the area, so you need that much density in order to compensate for this restoration, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, George Heslop. 2 minutes. George Heslop. Are you George Heslop? Yes. 2 minutes.
Your Worship, Council, and ladies and gentlemen, first off, I'm going to give you some real class figures. A mature tree takes in 90 times more than an immature tree for carbon dioxide. Put it in another way, each mature tree takes in 48 pounds of carbon dioxide in a year and releases enough oxygen for 2 people to live on in a year. So that means an immature tree, if you want to plant these hedges, can only take in half a pound. Now, we'll get into something else. I find a half-truth is worse than a lie. Before, when I talked here, somebody asked the planning department, did you talk to the traffic regarding that 16th and Granville? No. Well, you already know the engineers, because of the water, would not okay this. Now, you wipe out these trees, the roots hold an awful lot of water in there, keep that ground stable. Remember, there used to be a river come down there, a creek. Now, further, they said they got a hold of everybody. The owner of my building, I live at 1551 West 16. They live at 1450 Angus, which is right there. But they were never informed or asked to come to this meeting till a third time. But the planning department said, got to save money, can only go 2 blocks. Well, they're a closer block than Tecumseh, which is actually 2 blocks away. And I wonder if Tecumseh is even in First Shaughnessy, because I thought First Shaughnessy was Osler. I could be mistaken. But anyhow, we're supposed to be going green. You're going to get more traffic. And you've got to really think that way. You just can't wipe out those trees. I don't care what the arborist says. I've studied woodworking for 30 years. And something's wrong. Anyhow, thank you.
Robert Angus for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I don't really have anything prepared, actually. I feel a little bit today like I'm in the twilight zone. I own stock in a company called ROR, which is Run Up River. And the Honorable Minister, I'm not sure, but Mr. Penner, decided that it was in the public interest, even though no one lived in the area, to cancel this $350 million hydro project. It's called Run Up River because instead of a dam, you run through penstocks and return the water back to the river. So that happened to me this morning. Unfortunately, owning stock in this company cost me some money. The stock dropped down to 25 cents a share, and I lost money. Now, am I allowed to ask the government for, recovery of this money? I don't think so. I don't think that they're going to give me that money. As I told you the last time that I was speaking before you, you actually have the right to tell the developer, sorry, you could actually zone this property heritage and say you're not allowed to tear it down. The lower lot, which is free, clear title lot, you can do, you can allow him to build according to the rules. If he followed the rules, there would not be a problem. I think that you should actually kind of read the documentation that has been prepared to you by your staff. For instance, in this document, it states that the prior Greencroft proposal, that council decided in its wisdom to allow 2 infills. I don't know how many of you were on council at that point in time, but the planning staff suggested that what was actually necessary at Greencroft was to divide the main house into 3 properties and to build 4 infills.
Summarize.
No, I'm sorry, I am allowed to talk as long as I want.
Well,
you said that earlier.
Excuse me.
I'm
sir,
not going to speak for very long. Don't worry about it.
Please summarize.
No, I'm going to finish what I'm saying, okay?
Madam
My
Clerk,
point
can
was,
I
you have disrupted me. You've wasted
Sir,
a half a minute.
Sir,
well, I'm trying to get back online, okay?
Sir,
I'm in the middle.
Excuse
me. Do you want to spend your time going back and forth?
Sir, I just want to get a clarification from the clerk. I believe you didn't request to speak right away, so you came back later and asked to speak again, which is we agreed to give you another couple of minutes on that.
I only need about a minute.
Okay.
We're wasting the time
Please,
playing verbal games. Okay.
Please.
I was in the middle of speaking. The original proposal given to council was to take Greencroft, break the main house into 3 facilities, build 4 infills. Council, in their wisdom, decided that was excessive and decided to make it the main house broken into 2 condominiums and 2 infills. Had the original developer just followed the rules, council wouldn't have wasted 4 or 5 nights of public meeting. They would have built 1 infill and split the main house into 3. It would have ended up being the same thing as it ended up being. But they would have just followed the rules. That was one point. The other point that you should look at is the sustainability report, where it's claimed there's no issue over the water. There's going to be significant issue over the water. There's nothing physical here in terms, I am a professional engineer, and there's nothing that describes what the situation will be when you carve into that very steep hill and the amount of retention that will be required. It's going to be a large number, and I think that you should ask your engineering department how big a retention system will be required. I think it will be very, very large, very unlikely to work.
Thank you very
much. And
much.
that's it, Your Honor. I'm sorry that we had to argue with each other. I do respect you.
So I believe that's the end of the... Pardon me? Oh, yes, right. Greg Moe. Greg Moe.
Your Worship, members of council, ladies and gentlemen, I was up earlier and I was in the process of discussing the comparative compensation requirements in respect of this proposal in Greencroft, and I'll just carry on in my prepared remarks. Before I articulate a final and what is certainly the most dramatic, unjustifiable giveaway, I think it's necessary to clarify an important matter for those in attendance. The Greencroft compensation scheme design did not allow for a comparison of the financial outcomes of the project in 2 distinct cases. and those cases were the outcome of the heritage retention scheme that was proposed and built, vis-a-vis the outcome of the scheme wherein the heritage residence would have been demolished, the lot subdivided into two in the case of Greencroft, and two large modern mansions built and sold for profit. It's the latter and far more generous methodology which the city and the developer are now using for the current McRae proposal. It took approximately 17 months from the date of purchase to the settlement of the compensation scheme for the Greencroft project. During that time, the value of the Greencroft estate increased very significantly. Land values were rising very rapidly, and it was well above the original purchase price by the time the settlement occurred. The city required that the Greencroft compensation scheme stay with the historical cost of the estate. I repeat, we were forced to stay with the historical cost of the estate and considered all increases in market value to be included as part of the offered compensation scheme at the time it was settled. However, for this McRae proposal, all the gain in the fair market value since the purchase, arguably something in the order of $5 million, has just been put in the developer's pocket. The city is using the current fair market value of the estate lands as the starting point for the compensation calculations. Clearly, such an approach leads to a ridiculous and an artificially high magnitude of compensation than would have been the case using the same historical cost basis, which was the basis that was mandated by the city for use with the Greencroft redevelopment. Such inexplicable changes in approach by the city clearly translate into a need for a greater number of townhouses than should be required to support the McRae development. Just hours before the 10th March hearing, I was forwarded a memorandum that was dated the 6th of March. It was drafted by the Director of Real Estate Services and addressed to Mayor and Council. It was apparently in response, in part, to a question raised regarding the comparison of approaches used in the pro forma evaluation of the McRae and the Greencroft applications. In this memorandum, it says that, quote, the pro forma evaluation was conducted similarly as between the two different developments. In light of the number and the magnitude of inconsistencies that I cited earlier and just moments ago in respect to these two pro formas, I find it shocking that anyone could characterize such processes as similar. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Greencroft unencumbered land values were not estimated at the date of evaluation using the market comparison approach. And if they were done quietly in the background by the city, and for some reason, purposive or otherwise, they were not discussed or they were not in any way shared with the applicant. This same memorandum goes on to state that, quote, it was agreed with the developer that the extra holding costs associated with the time delay would also be included in the amount of transferable bonus density, end quote. As I was the developer, I can say with confidence that this statement is also not accurate. The fact is that the then current Director of Current Planning, Larry Beasley, called me into his office for a private meeting with a few key city staff, and he offered to compensate the project with some additional transfer bonus density if we would agree to restructure the project as a strata as opposed to a legal subdivision. This additional density was provided to cover only the increased financing costs of such restructuring, and I still have a copy of the calculations to support that fact. Clearly, if the McRae proposal were evaluated using the same compensatory scheme as the Greencroft project, the amount of compensation allowable would be dramatically reduced, and such would further support the opposing stakeholders' position that the number of townhouse titles being offered as compensation to the applicant under this scheme is quite excessive. What is even more troubling is to ask, why are there such huge inconsistencies between what this applicant for a Heritage A designation is being offered versus what the Greencroft scheme was being offered? Greencroft was a substantially larger residence with a more complex and arguably greater architectural value than Nickel House. When one compares the statements of historical significance, Greencroft has at least an equal, if not a superior provenance in respect of construction and occupation by the late Lieutenant Governor, a sign of British Columbia industry for over 4 decades. The stakeholders are entitled to understand why the Greencroft restoration was given a very marginal, take-it-or-leave-it offer for compensation by the city staff, and whereas the current McRae proposal is being gifted with almost everything the city can throw at it. We opposing stakeholders of this current application deserve to know what city policies in respect of compensatory schemes for heritage designation have changed between the time of the Greencroft application hearings and this application's hearings. Why such policy has changed, and why the local residents and the owner stakeholders who live in First Shaughnessy have not been involved in any such discussions nor informed of such change.
I have a question, sir, from Councillor Anton.
Let's have a question first on the density issue. Did Greencroft have transferable or density transferred off that property?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
And did that density get sold eventually?
It did.
Do you know where it got moved to?
I do. I would have to relook at the records for the project to be accurate.
Somewhere downtown or in Shaughnessy?
I believe one of the purchasers was downtown.
I see Mr. Jenkins nodding. He may have the answer to that. To downtown. And perhaps Mr. Evans can help with the issues that the delegate is raising in terms of the comparables and the comparable scheme of what we were offering one time and another time.
Excuse me. In calculating the compensation, we use the heritage policies and guidelines, and that's what we've done in this case. Those same heritage policies and guidelines were in place at the time of Greencroft. So we went through the same process in terms of calculating the shortfall costs.
Can you just remind us of what the overall equation is?
Well, in very simple terms, it's the difference between the unencumbered land value versus the encumbered land value. And so that process would have been exactly the same with this particular project and also with Greencroft.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well,
do you have more, sir?
Yes, I would like to continue if there's no other speakers. I'm happy to sit down and let others come up and then return.
Pardon? Harrison Cito wants to come back again.
I would like to come back in.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. One issue I also raised last time I spoke was the issue of the podium. The podium being made out of non-podium elements, made out of trees and the clouds, the rain, the sun, the soil. And I also drew the analogy, likewise, humans are made out of non-human elements. Humans are made of non-human elements, and humans are made of non-human elements. So in this case, the non-human element is the green space, 3237 Granville. And Mr. Hyssop, George Hyssop, talked about the carbon dioxide absorbing factor of a mature tree versus a young tree. So even though the landscape people will say, yes, we have 44% more trees, the carbon dioxide absorbing ability would not match 44% more. And so that's important because humans are made out of non-human elements like trees, especially since trees have a direct correlation to our health because we breathe in oxygen, which trees manufacture, and trees breathe in carbon dioxide, which we manufacture. There is a new report, January 2008, issued by the Land Trust Alliance of British Columbia, Mitigating and Adapting to Climate Change Through the Conservation of Nature by Sarah Wilson and Richard Hebda. And Sarah is the leading Canadian researcher on ecological economics, which is an emerging field that values nature services. Richard Hebda is the curator of botany and earth history of Royal BC Museum, an adjunct associate professor, biology, schools of earth and ocean sciences, and environmental studies at the University of Victoria, and is a respected published author and presenter on climate change. There is a summary. Climate change has brought increased awareness to environment, resulting in public and political calls for actions to address this significant challenge, Kyoto. Climate change has impacted adversely the quality of our life, and the biomass and soils, the living carbon of ecosystems, they remove and store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere naturally. So if we remove this particle of green space, we're also removing something that sustains our human life. The web of life, which has been known by the First Nations people, and they say something like, we do not own this land, we borrow the land from our children, and they say we steal this land from our grandchildren. And so they like to look at the stewardship of the land for 7 generations. So there is the heritage of Nickel House, there is the heritage of the Rose Gardens, and there is the heritage of our own life-sustaining green space, the non-human element which we are made out of. I guess unfortunately, Vanessa, who spoke about the people, for those who couldn't speak, her father is has been diagnosed with cancer, so Vanessa couldn't be here tonight. And I feel I'm the kind of sole person tonight to speak for the environment, to speak for the life-sustaining ecosystem that gives us our life. And I'd like to continue speaking as much as I can, sharing the podium with Mr. Molnar, just to help educate you. And I hope I do not push your patience too much, but I would like to continue speaking.
Councillor Capri.
Can I just get an indication from the speakers about how long they plan to continue speaking, only because I don't want to miss the debate, but I need to step out otherwise.
How long do you want to keep speaking?
I could speak for another 15 minutes.
Okay.
On this issue or on trees?
Well, it's related to this application because in my mind there are a lot of issues, but we're just kind of focusing on, say, the performa, the traffic, and I'd like to bring in the other issues.
I would like to suggest that we're straying.
Yeah,
it's not that it's not important stuff, but in terms of this application, I think that this presentation's straying a bit.
Have to really keep it to the issue of the zoning issue. But, okay, so Mr. Greg, no, sorry, Mr.
Can I suggest that you let
if you could try to keep it to the rezoning.
Okay. Unfortunately, Councillor Capri left, and I wanted to ask her exactly what she felt I was straying and what I needed to get back onto the rezoning application.
Well, Councillor Ladner may have something to say to it.
We have a very narrow range of options here. We're not actually here to discuss the ecosystem and the environment, I'm afraid, and the trees are really incidental to this whole issue. I know the trees are very important. Trees are vital. We all love trees. We'd all like to see more trees, but we're talking about the built form, the landscape, and I don't think we're gaining any ground or learning anything important by hearing a lot about the trees. I'm sorry. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you for that input. That gives me a little more feedback on.
And furthermore, this is the 4th night we've been at this, and at the rate we're going to be here for another night because we won't be finished in a half an hour. And I think everybody wants to make a decision on this tonight and get it over with and get it resolved. And I think that we should take that into consideration and wrap it up fairly promptly. We've still got some more proponents and people to hear from, and we're pretty well going to go over 10 o'clock the rate we're going.
I think Mr. Molnar and I are the last speakers, but I hear your point.
No, there may be other speakers.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, let me just take a moment to gather my thoughts away from the trees.
Do you want to have Mr. Moe speak first, and then you can...
Oh, no. Let me just take a moment, and then we'll let him have the floor. Okay. Today, this morning, I did notice the pruning of the trees, and I did take a video of that pruning, just for maybe a couple minutes. Does anyone want to see that video?
No, I think we're okay.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So let me go back and finish with the MasterCard ad. So perhaps you've seen the ad on television about people buying some thing, whether going with a soccer team to go buy donuts or something, and then there's a price for that. And then the follow-up of that ad is something great, some human kind of element, and they say it's priceless. So likewise, Mayor and councillors, you have a precious opportunity to preserve our natural and our historic heritage. If the MasterCard ad were to play in Vancouver, there might be people lining up from Japan and Australia and Germany and coming to pay their bus tour ticket, $19.95, whatever it is, and going through Shaughnessy through a bus tour, and then that's where the oohs and ahs of like awe, it goes to priceless. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. My apologies for straying. And you do have my suggestion of not accepting the rezoning, of having infills, of keeping 3238 Granville as a green space and being donated as a land conservancy.
Thank you very much.
Your Worship, councillors, attendees, I wanted to move away from financial discussions, but before I did, I had some concerns about the information I had conveyed in the last several minutes here this evening, where I told you all the facts of what really occurred in respect of the last Heritage A designation and compensation scheme. And I lived it, and I have the proof to back everything that I stated up as a fact, and I have some concerns that staff basically suggested that what I said was not the facts, and I hope council can somehow evaluate those inconsistencies, because I'd be happy to step forward and meet with the subcommittee and prove everything that I said in respect of those financial parameters. Anyway, moving ahead from shifting financial goalposts and uneven playing fields, I'd like to make some observations about the public consultation process that has occurred with this application. City staff described that there were 4 pre-application co-design sessions that were, and that invitations were sent out to SHPOA, the FSADP, and the Vancouver Heritage Commission, as well as 16 property owners that were closest to the site. I've been accurately advised that many of the 16 owners who fit this description as invitees were never in fact so informed and knew nothing of this process. In addition to this, city staff advised that only 1 open house was held and that notification of such was provided to the community through a mail drop. I have no idea what the city means by the word community. However, my view is that every resident in First Shaughnessy had a right and entitlement to receive a notification of not only the open house, but of each of the co-design sessions, and well in advance of such sessions, so that reasonable arrangements could be made for parties who had a strong desire to be involved, to have their opinions voiced, but still preserving manageable numbers of attendees as well as competent representation at each session. Also, I believe that there should have been multiple opportunities for each First Shaughnessy resident to engage in the public process, and multiple communication vehicles, such as mail drops, phone calls, community newspaper advertising to advise people of such opportunities. There were no such efforts made to inform local First Shaughnessy residents of the details of the single open house. Yet, according to city staff, of those that did respond to the mailing or the completed response forms at or following the open house, 91% opposed the application. This is a similar percentage of opposition that was found to exist on the Vote McRae website, which forum was organized by an immediate neighbor on the Crescent, who had grave concerns about the implications of this proposed development, as well as similar concerns about the abuse of stakeholder process and the lack of consultation opportunities that city staff had provided. In the report to Council, city staff recognized but seemed to completely discount the importance of this overwhelming opposition of the key stakeholders. Such a failure to consider the scope and the scale of the opposition clearly suggests that staff must not believe the opponents really understand all the facts of the issues, and that such resident opponent opinions are simply not important enough to cause any type of derailing or slowdown of the application process. City staff seem to also rely heavily on the apparent support of the project by members of SHPOA, the FSADP, and the VHC. However, the context of such support is based on the absolute premise that the application, as proposed, is destined to proceed. It's simply not accurate to characterize honest efforts to address the multitude of design weaknesses in this otherwise flawed proposal as a show of overall support for the scheme, when clearly it's being done within the context of an imposed solution, rather than an honest appraisal of the acceptability of the scheme as a whole. This is a critically important distinction, and I truly believe that Council understands the significance of that. And it was also addressed at the 10 March hearing when Council questioned at some length a speaker who was one of the local residents and members of the FSDP. As Heritage A residents, owners in First Shaughnessy, and members of SHPOA, my wife and I received no communication from the city at any time about this application or any of the co-design sessions or the open house. The first we heard of this application was through contact with parties who championed the Vote McRae website. It was not until that extremely late notification that we contacted city heritage planners for a personal meeting to find out about the application and the process. If any reasonable cross-section of interested resident stakeholders in First Shaughnessy were to be contacted to provide input into the co-design process, then I submit that my wife and I should have been on that list, but we were not. I suspect hundreds of other First Shaughnessy resident owners with equal interest but with less personal experience in the HRA process would equally wish to have been informed by the city in advance and throughout the consultation process, and to the extent that that notification process failed dismally. When we had Heritage City planning staff over to Greencroft to show them the result of the restoration and find out more about the status of the current McRae proposal, my wife spoke, inter alia, about the Greencroft Transfer of Density Study, which was commissioned by the city in late 2004 and delivered for final staff evaluation and community feedback in March 2005. My wife was surprised that important Heritage planning staff had not heard of this report and certainly were unaware of its contents and recommendations. In the report are many interesting issues, but of particular interest to me from a financial perspective is that the report concluded that, quote, the city provide greater transparency in the financial and density bonusing agreements that are negotiated because these are public assets determined by City Council. It seems fair to give the public access to pro forma calculations. Alternatively, the appointment of an independent auditor to confirm the fairness of such agreements may be appropriate, end quote. This quotation.
Do you have more? Is it quite a bit more? Because now you're at 6 minutes, and we do have potentially some other speakers. Do you want us to call for those first and then come back, or do you finish?
I have about 30 or 40 seconds to get to a natural break point.
Okay, sure.
This quotation has identified two critically important issues in early 2005 that clearly have not been considered by the city in their process for the McRae proposal, all of which indicates that the city has not benefited from public monies that it's spent on such advice and is not learning from historical practice and is continuing to make the same mistakes. I suspect, as do others, that city staff have been victims of failing to take stock of their own process. It seems that they were moving rapidly through their checklist stages of co-design and then an open house, and they were not disposed to take the temperature of the stakeholder sentiment, checking back with them after each stage and making sure that there were sufficient and appropriate stakeholders actually contacted, showing up and fully and openly participating in each stage. I believe that in more recent months, once more significant numbers of First Shaughnessy residents finally became aware of what was happening in respect of this proposal, the city staff started to become aware of the groundswell of intelligent and strongly positioned opposition. I believe now that more than anything, this failure of the city consultation process and the resulting minimization of stakeholder involvement has, more than any one single factor, galvanized the resident stakeholders into such a passionate state of opposition to this application for spot rezoning. I have a little bit more material, and I'm happy to sit down and come back when others have finished.
Okay, maybe we'll finish and we'll have some. Okay, so, Madam Clerk, is that appropriate for me now to ask for the other speakers? So, are there any other speakers?
I spoke before and I asked to be put on the list. Maybe my name was called already here, Terry Condio.
Did you? So you have 2 minutes, and I guess is something new that you want to add?
I didn't get a chance to finish last time, but I'd just like to point out that I did mention that I take the bus every morning. The 98 bus was the bus that used to. It's prevented my number 16 from being as active anymore. It doesn't come as often or the number 10 because of the 98. I just want to point that out to you. You asked that question whether it bothered us at all. The other point that I wanted to mention was Highcroft Towers does have a lot of parking. We have some resident parking along Morpole Avenue. Somebody mentioned a little earlier tonight that Highcroft Towers doesn't have enough parking as it is, and we have lots of parking underground and mezzanine level, plus we have some spots that we've got resident parking. We don't take up that much room. When I see 14 or 16 townhouses coming up and 51 spaces for parking, then I think that that's not going the green way. I stand and wait for a bus every morning. I take the bus from 16th and Granville to work at Sinclair Centre every day and back. I don't see that if you're going to put in 51 parking spaces for 16 townhouses that you're going to see many people taking the same bus as I do every morning. I can almost guarantee it if we're talking about density. I think we should go with the plan of not building the townhouses, and I believe that I think council should really think it through. As my friend mentioned earlier, the last time council didn't listen to South Granville, there was only one returning councillor, and Mr. Sullivan, you know who it was, that was on the 98 Rapid bus. Please do not think that South Granville will always vote for a particular party, because I can assure I was out there in South Granville last time supporting your party, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to do that again this time. Thank you.
Any other speakers?
Yes, but I was preferring to hear
Are there any other speakers? Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, then we'll have. I think you already.
But there was a comment that was made.
You spoke twice.
Owner of Green Croft.
Well, hold on a sec. You spoke twice, didn't you? No. Did you speak twice already?
Yes. But I want to clarify something. There is a misnomer here.
Yeah.
I'm the former owner of Greencroft. I sold it to some of those people.
Yes, sir.
And I live there.
We can't really get into a debate at this point, but
right.
Thank you very much. Yes, did you? I didn't. You didn't speak? Yeah, okay.
My name is Anita Chan, and I live on 4038 Selkirk Street. I'm a resident of the First Shaughnessy. Mayor Sullivan, City Councillor, and ladies and gentlemen, my stand is against the rezoning of the Nickel House property. Much has been said regarding the proposal to the development of Nickel House property and its adjacent land. Therefore, I'll keep my comment short and straight to the point. Being a businessman, the developer of the site knew exactly what he got himself into when he purchased the property. He knew of the property's nature, of the heritage nature of the property, and the bylaws that were in place. Yet, in his proposed plan, he used this property as hostage and held the people of this Shaughnessy district for ransom. By giving into this proposed proposal will not only jeopardize the future of all heritage sites, the integrity of the bylaws that were put in place to protect them, but to also allow a form of bullying to take place in our neighborhood. So, dear city councillors, you have been elected to protect the interests of the people, and the people have spoken. I strongly urge you to reject this rezoning plan. Thank you very much.
Are there any other speakers? Okay.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. My name is Charles Bonhomme, and I live in Highcroft Towers across the street from the proposed development. And I wanted to thank the Mayor and Council for holding all of these meetings. I don't know if that's been said much. I've only attended one prior to this one. And I really appreciate the attention you're giving this matter. And I know you're between a rock and a hard place on the policy that somewhat restricts the staff on what they can recommend to you. But I guess someone alluded to being in the Twilight Zone. I feel like I'm in a Frank Capra movie, and I'm no Jimmy Stewart, but I'm wondering at what point do we sort of look at this and say this is just not right, and for all the reasons that have been said already, and I'm sure they've been repeated several times already, but I don't even mind the development itself. It just feels like it's just not in the right place, and who am I to speak, because I'm sure there were beautiful trees where Highcroft Towers once stood, 60 years ago, but there's just so very little of that natural green space left, and I see it being just a real shame to put in kind of another replica of what we see in Yaletown, and that which is just not natural, not sustaining, as some of the environmental voices have said tonight already. But I'm hoping for a miracle here. I wish that the developer could really reconsider and forget perhaps the profit motive and consider what a beautiful gem it is that is going to be destroyed forever if we let this proceed. So thank you, and best of luck on the decision.
Okay. Are there any other speakers? Are there any other speakers? Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, we will complete with Mr. Moe and Mr. Kwok. Pardon me? No, the speakers list closed.
Worship, councillors, fellow attendees, on the 10th of March, a number of council members asked speakers whether they were in favor of having this developer tear down the Nickel House, if that was the only alternative to acceptance of the current 16 townhouse application scheme. In all cases, although no one wished for this outcome, the response was affirmative, and that this Heritage A residence was not worth saving at any cost. Notwithstanding our Heritage speakers' opinions as to the necessity of saving the Nickel House in situ and the entire front gardens as they now appear, there have been many others who do not agree. Many residents would prefer to see the Nickel House moved forward in the parcel to achieve a setback from the Crescent that achieves a greater consistency with setbacks of other residences on the Crescent. Contemporaneously, many feel that doing so would still allow the preservation and protection of a very significant portion of the front gardens and make such space more visually accessible to the viewing public and usable by future owners. Currently, the plans call for a space that is so large it becomes virtually an expensive public garden in perpetuity, and largely unusable and eminently impractical relative to 21st century lifestyles of even the most affluent. Some would say that such an enormous garden and its attendant cost in perpetuity actually detracts from the attractiveness of the marketability of the Nickel House and lot as proposed, vis-a-vis the alternative of moving it forward some reasonable distance. It's interesting to note that even the applicant's first design scheme included this moved forward approach with infills and large Shaughnessy elements, but was turned aside for reasons which presumably bore strongly on compensation issues and on the heritage expert opinion not to move the Nickel House at all. But to not move it and allow 5 townhouses in very close proximity would cause many residents to prefer it be taken down and 3 or more beautiful new Shaughnessy mansion elements be constructed in its place. It's hard to imagine, having looked at some of the financial pro formas, that moving the Nickel House forward on its lot, complemented with 1 to 4 infills and further complemented by 2 Shaughnessy-style mansions,
possibly designated to include strata units, could not be demonstrated to provide the applicant more than adequate compensation for preservation of this house, particularly if it were modeled on the financial compensation scheme that was used by the city for the Greencroft HRA and restoration. I believe that the foregoing is an example of one of a number of reasonable alternative design schemes that need to be reviewed with an appropriately constructed co-design panel. And such panel must have strong representation from knowledgeable First Shaughnessy residents, and particularly those who are immediate neighbours on and around the Crescent, as they have the most invested in this community, and they will be most affected in both short-term and long-term by a flawed rezoning scheme, and they deserve to have their design views carefully and fully considered. Stepping back to the larger picture, there are two perspectives held by opponents to the McRae proposal. Many, if not most, are strongly opposed to any spot rezoning, and wish Council to send this proposal back for redesign to fit in with the general provisions allowed, maybe with some relaxations under the First Shaughnessy ODP. The second perspective, held by a few more moderates, is that the spot rezoning be allowed, but only under circumstances that the city negotiate with a minimum number of townhouses with the developer, and that any such renegotiation must include the elimination of the row of 5 townhouses intruding into the Nichols House backyard, and that the financial compensation scheme be calculated and validated by a completely independent and unconflicted third-party quantity survey firm, and such scheme be made part of the public record by the city, all in accordance with the recommendations of the Greencroft Transfer Density Study. Given all of the above, I ask that Council deny this premature and inadequately consulted application and send it back to City staff and the applicant with conditions. And 4 of the key conditions should be request that 1, the design be reconsidered in conjunction with a properly constituted First Shaughnessy resident stakeholder group as an integral part of a co-design team. Secondly, that Council also require that an independent and unbiased, unconflicted third-party quantity survey firm be utilized to protect the interests of the public stakeholders and the city in determining in a fair manner and with full disclosure, and utilizing comparable financial evaluation methodology that was used for the Greencroft project, the real value of compensation required for the applicant to effect the revised design scheme that better preserves all of the qualities of the estate-like look and feel of the First Shaughnessy district. Thirdly, that the city, notwithstanding staff recommendations to the contrary, gives strong reconsideration to the re-implementation of a transfer density award to this applicant in lieu of some of the proposed on-site townhouse density. And lastly, that Council place a moratorium on any such future applications for heritage residences that involve such contentious spot rezoning requests until the McRae development is complete and a study has been completed, reviewed and finalized with involvement of all stakeholders as to the overall outcome of the final form of its development. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
You have a question? Staff, sorry, it's a question for staff. Thank you very much.
It's actually 2 questions to staff. I can't believe I don't know this, but would the Rose Garden be a public garden?
The gardens in the front yard are part of the HRA designation.
Right.
They're not there's
no
public right of way or anything.
Garden, and I went, I didn't think so. And then the other question is, were Council to move an amended motion? I've heard talk about this elimination of the 5 townhouses. So were we to move approval with the elimination of that piece there, how would that translate? Like, what would be the implications of that kind of a motion?
Well, you could do that. So Council could has a number of options before it. It could refuse the application, or it could approve it with amendments to the recommendations or changes, additions, etc. From there, then, of course, you're not enacting the bylaw tonight. So depending on the significance of the changes you're seeking, my advice would be if there's significant design changes, like go look at a whole different scheme, we wouldn't be able to do that on the fly, and we would be looking at a completely different bylaw. So I think the advice would be to refuse it. If it's to do something that's quite obvious, like remove the 5-unit townhouses, you could do that. But my suggestion, procedurally, you can do that, and we could, adjust the bylaw when it comes forward to enactment to reflect the resulting loss in density and the form of development, et cetera. So procedurally, we could do that. My advice would be that you take the temperature of the developer, because he doesn't have to proceed with enactment of the bylaw. So if you approve something tonight that's a stripped down version of what's being proposed, he can walk away and not enact the bylaw, which would leave him in a position of being able to develop under First Shaughnessy zoning, but not necessarily have to save the house.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help?
Sir Chow?
Your Worship, I just want to let Mr. Moe know that I did get your speech in printed copy. Essentially, what you have presented it's here. So, and I just want to confirm with staff that anything that we get, I guess you also have. Some of the questions that were raised by Mr. Moe on the financial, the pro forma, the differences, so it's all noted on here. So I guess you have a copy, and so it. Yes, it is. Okay. February 14 is the date I have. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So. Now yes, Mr. Clark, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of Council. My name is Peter Kwok. I'm the immediate past president of the Shaughnessy Heights Property Owners Association. I'm no longer on the board now, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the association. But because of that prior involvement, I do know something about the FSODP. At the last public hearing, we heard the Director of Planning say that the FSODP tells him that saving a heritage house is paramount in terms of the intent of the FSODP. And all this is proposed in order to enable him to achieve what the FSODP tells him to do. I was rather amused that his staff then went on to say that she had to take part of this parcel out of the FSODP in order to achieve what the FSODP is supposed to achieve. I don't know about you, but I sure have problems with that kind of logic. But in any case, you're now faced with two different interpretations of the FSODP. The Director of Planning is of the opinion that saving the heritage house should be done at all costs. At the same time, you've heard from neighbor after neighbor, numerous of them, telling you that that is too high a price to pay. And if push comes to shove, they would rather sacrifice the Nickel House than sacrifice the overall character of First Shaughnessy. And some of these people, remember, actually took part in coming up with the FSODP back in the early 80s. And in general, the sentiment of the people of Shaughnessy is that the single-family estate home character of the whole neighborhood is far more important than any one single heritage house. So when faced with these two different and very opposite interpretations, maybe it's worthwhile for us to take a look at what the FSODP actually says. In the intent section, the first paragraph has only one sentence in it, and it encapsulates the essence of the FSODP. The rest of it is just further details and elaboration. This first paragraph, with a single sentence, reads, "The objective of this plan is to protect and preserve Shaughnessy's unique pre-1940 character." Ladies and gentlemen, this is not pre-1940 character. If you look elsewhere, under the goals section, sure, there is one sentence that talks about preserving meritorious heritage house. However, far more prevalent is language such as to promote excellence in architectural design and construction that is compatible with pre-1940 houses in the area, to preserve and improve the public and private streetscape, to retain First Shaughnessy as a predominantly single-family residential community, to limit further subdivision, etc. This proposal flies in the face of all of that. So, faced with these two interpretations, are you going to take the Director of Planning's misguided interpretation of the FSODP, or are you going to take the interpretation of the people whom you, all of you, represent? I'm afraid the Director of Planning's interpretation is missing the forest for the trees, whereas the people who have spoken out so eloquently, remember, these are people who live in Shaughnessy, who breathe the air of Shaughnessy, who care more about the preservation of heritage in Shaughnessy than anybody else. So it seems like the choice is very clear. However, I understand if you turn down this application, you worry that the Nickel House may be lost. Well, Mr. Bowe has already told you, and some other speakers too, one solution is to move the house forward and preserve it. And remember, that was the initial proposal of this developer. He was going to move this house forward so that it sits completely on the first lot facing the crescent, and then build additional housing behind that. And don't forget, your staff tells you that having 3 single-family houses on those 3 lots will give this developer the adequate financial compensation that he seeks. So the simple solution would be to move that Nickel House forward and then build 2 single-family houses and the lots behind it in accordance with the provisions of the FSODP. Now, the remaining question is, if you turn this down, how do you know the developer is going to move the house forward rather than tear it down, other than the fact that he did propose that at the beginning? Well, this developer is a businessman. It only costs $1.4 million to restore the Nickel House because it's in very good shape, and you've heard from staff that only a small portion of that is needed to restore the house itself. Most of that goes towards the garden. To tear down this house and build new, taking the construction cost of the townhouses as a guideline, it's going to cost $4 to $5 million. So restoring it is far cheaper than tearing it down and building new. And admittedly, I didn't add in the cost of moving the house. I asked an architect friend of mine, David Kwan, who spoke earlier, and he said moving it would probably cost $200,000 or so. Well, let's say it costs $1 million. The total cost would be only about 2.4. Let's say $3 million. It's still far cheaper than tearing it down and building new. What about the resale value? Well, you've heard from Donna Aiken, whose presentation was given by Cyril Chen earlier, that a heritage house with the quality of Nickel House, or the house that she lived in, with its historical value and heritage value, is going to be very valuable to the market, probably worth the same or more than the new house. And Mr. Greg Moe will tell you the same thing too, and that's why he restored Greencroft rather than tore it down. So if he can sell this restored house at about the same price or maybe more than new house, and it costs less than building a new house, why would he be stupid enough to tear it down? Although there's no guarantee, I would suggest that if you turn down this application, the risk of demolition of Nickel House is very minimal. And as people of Shaughnessy have already told you, if push comes to shove, they would rather sacrifice Nickel House than sacrifice the whole neighborhood. The only problem with moving the Nickel House forward is that you lose part of that rose garden in the front. Remember, you don't lose all of it, just part of it. But the compensation is the Nickel House will be showcased much better. Actually, that may increase its resale value. It will also line up better with the rest of the house along the crescent and improves the streetscape of the crescent, which is in accordance with the provisions of the FSODP. So by turning this down and letting the developer move that house forward and build additional housing behind it, it's all gain and no loss. By turning down this proposal, you will not only be doing a service to the people of Shaughnessy, you will be doing a service to all the people of Vancouver by sending out a strong signal that you are for preserving the unique character of every single neighborhood, and you are against spot zoning that destroys that character. Thank you very much.
past 10 o'clock. So, Councillor Anton, did you have a question?
I do. Of Mr. Kwok, please.
Or should we move it to the next evening?
We can finish the speakers, I think.
Okay.
Send it to council after this, I think. Mr. Kwok,
we have to hear it from the developer and the staff as well before, if we're going to refer it to council.
No, staff and developer. Okay, I'll try and be quick here. The tearing, to me, what distinguishes First Shaughnessy from every other single-family neighborhood is the heritage. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Because otherwise, every single-family neighborhood would say our neighborhood is single-family, don't touch it. So the heritage is an added, not just an added layer, but it's the whole reason for having the special zoning. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So to tear down the house, I mean, if you could dispense with the heritage, then you might as well just dispense with the whole First Shaughnessy District ODP.
No, the ODP has many different other provisions, such as building infill housing or converting a large single-family house into multiple conversion dwellings.
Yeah, that's so. But I'm just talking about the tearing down option right now.
Yes. Well, the people of Shaughnessy is of the opinion that the single-family and estate home character of First Shaughnessy is a far more important character than any one single heritage house.
But I guess you could, somebody in Kerrisdale or Dunbar or Point Grey might say the same thing.
They might, but the difference is First Shaughnessy has bigger lots, bigger estate homes, lower density than, say, Dunbar or Kerrisdale. And that's why the tourists come to look at First Shaughnessy. They don't go to look at Kerrisdale.
But they come to look at the heritage, though. I mean, the purpose of the whole First Shaughnessy District ODP is the heritage.
Yes. But doing this would preserve the heritage house, but destroy the overall character. For lack of a better term, is a bigger evil than losing the nickel house.
I'm just discussing the tear down option right now.
Well, but as I said, the risk of tear down is quite minimal, I think.
Okay, so the tear down option means really that you're dispensing with the heritage, which is the whole purpose of the First Shaughnessy ODP.
No. Well, you've heard from the people.
No, I'm asking you, Mr. Clark.
Yeah, well, I think that I do agree with the majority of the people in Shaughnessy that preserving that low-density, single-family, large estate home character is far more important than one single heritage house. So tearing it down will not destroy the character of First Shaughnessy.
But surely you could say that in any neighborhood in the city.
No, because the other neighborhoods, let's talk about Belmont and so on, most of them are not this low density and they do not have estate homes like Shaughnessy has. And if you look at some of the houses that have been torn down in the last, say, 10, 20 years and redeveloped, the newer houses have a lot of very nice characters that are just about as attractive as the original home, sometimes more attractive than the original home. And those new houses also give Shaughnessy the heritage character. 50 years from now, those will be heritage homes just like this one. So losing one is not the end of the world.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ladner.
Mr. Clark, we've heard a lot tonight about the trees, and we've heard a lot of clapping about preserving the trees and the lungs and all this stuff. Your proposal doesn't have much time for the trees.
I didn't talk about the trees.
You're okay with losing the trees, is that what I'm hearing?
Pardon me?
You're okay with losing the trees?
Well, if this developer is to build a single-family house on each of the three lots, well, on the two lots other than the one that the nickel house will be moved to, then some trees will be lost. I understand that, and it's inevitable because whoever owns that piece of land is entitled to build a single-family house on there, and the consequence is losing some trees. It is inevitable, but definitely the number of trees lost when building single-family homes will be less than the number of trees lost when building this.
Well, maybe. I don't know if it'd be that significant. Certainly for the people from Highcroft, it won't be a green belt anymore. But
Well, the single-family home will have setback requirements around it. So the trees that are fronting on 16th Avenue should be, you should be able to preserve those. So they will still be looking at those mature trees.
If they so choose. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Chow.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just ask Mr. Kwok, thank you. You mentioned the figure of $1.4 million. So I got from staff the $1 million for the HRLA. So I guess $400,000 is for the rose garden, is for the garden preservation. Would that be correct? Oh, soft cost. Okay. So, Mr. Kwok, you mentioned about, tearing down or as a last resort, and I have asked these questions of the residents that, will you, try to preserve the heritage house at any cost? And I think the answers from a lot of them were no. And then I took it to mean that people are so emotional and worked up about this issue, and I think that's kind of the answer they were giving. And I'm sure the unique character of Shaughnessy is also those old homes, as well as the landscapes, the streetscapes, and the built form, which is really a single-family light type of building. So I think that's really the essence of First Shaughnessy. So I just want to reaffirm with you that that's what you meant when you said.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we hear from the applicant? And then we will refer this on to another meeting.
Your Honor, members of council, it's summary time, and I'd like to briefly summarize some of the important points that I think we all have to consider here about this proposal. And it's hard for me to sit through hours and hours, as I'm sure it is for you people as well. But sometimes it's harder for me because you're sitting in this sort of courtroom environment. And in spite of what the director of planning said a couple meetings ago, I think when somebody said, "Is this a legal proceeding, trial-like thing?" It is a trial, and I'm on trial here. This project is on trial. The planning department and the rest of the staff who supported this are on trial. All the bodies that had a look at this and supported it, they're on trial. You people are on trial too here, because all these people here who are waiting for a decision are putting you on the spot and hoping that you'll make a decision that's in favor of them and not me. Well, so we're all on trial here, and what I put forward here, as I told you at the very beginning when I made my first presentation, as a resident of Shaughnessy and somebody who's been involved in this sort of development before in Kerrisdale, and somebody who lives right next door to Greencroft and what used to be the garage of Greencroft. I've been there for 26 years, so I know the neighborhood. I know what gets people upset. And when I first proposed this and when I first thought about it and what would work here, I tried to take into consideration all the things that would get people upset. And obviously this is stepping outside the box. This is not something that fits within the guidelines the way that they're written. But the reason it doesn't is because this is a unique site. This is a 2.3-acre site with one house sitting in the middle of two lots. That lot line runs diagonally right through the middle of that house. And that is 60,000 square feet worth of very valuable property. Ostensibly, I suppose it could be the most key site in First Shaughnessy, sitting on the Crescent. It's got an old heritage house on it. Obviously, it has importance as far as heritage is concerned. So when I approach this, I like to approach things in a logical fashion, and hopefully common sense prevails and logic prevails. What we're trying to do here, and what council policy dictates and directs the planning department to do, and what they have done, is number one, try and preserve the heritage character of Shaughnessy. And what is the heritage character of Shaughnessy there? Well, it's that house sitting on an estate-like property facing the Crescent. The stuff down below there, that empty lot, which has got trees growing on it and compost from 100 years, I don't know what part of Shaughnessy that contributes to as far as heritage goes. It's been an empty lot for all these years. Granted, it has big trees on it that have been not looked after for 100 years, basically. But other than that, the important part, the focus, should be at the crescent and the old house that's sitting facing the crescent. And I don't see how anybody could disagree with that. That is the character, and that is what Shaughnessy is about. And if you're trying to preserve that, and if your policy directs that, then that's what we should be doing. And that's what staff had directed me to do when I first approached them, to talk about trying to do something worthwhile with this piece of property. Because realistically, one house sitting on 2.3 acres in the middle of the city is not going to sit like that very much longer. Whether it's me or whether it's the next guy in line, something's going to happen. And, I feel like that guy, you remember Tiananmen Square, where that guy stood in front of the tank with his hand up? Well, I'm standing in front of the crescent there with my hand up and the bulldozer's parked on the street. And I've been doing that for 2.5 years. I've been holding that bulldozer back, and in spite of what these people said, I have never threatened to tear that house down once. I don't care what anybody says. I have never threatened to tear that house down. And I might not have the heart to do that. If you turn this thing down, if you don't approve that, I might not have the heart to tear that thing down. But if I have to sell it to the next guy, I'm a businessman here. I'm running a business. This isn't philanthropy. I'm not giving property away. I don't know how many of these people want to give their house away. But I'm not doing it. It's a business. And if I walk away from this property and sell it for the highest and best use, what is that? The highest and best use is 3 vacant lots. Do you know what an empty lot facing the crescent is worth to somebody without an old house sitting on it? It's worth a hell of a lot more than one old house sitting on that property, whether I move it or not. I don't think the next person in line is going to look at it maybe in the same fashion that I have. And I put my money up. I've sat there for 2.5 years now. And I've gone through all this process, this co-design process, inviting neighbors and listening to design by committee ad nauseum, frankly. I can only be pulled and pushed in so many directions. I'm like a Gumby figure here. Every time somebody gets up and speaks, somebody has another idea. Well, are these people better qualified than the professionals hired by the city to say what should go on with council policy? Well, according to these 40 people in the room, yes. But I don't think that's correct. I don't think these people would be working in the jobs that they are doing if they weren't qualified. And trust me, I have a high degree of respect for these people. They've treated me with respect. They've treated every one of these neighbors with respect. They've done their best to make this very transparent and very fair to everybody. Miss Potter here has the patience of Mother Teresa, let me tell you. She has talked to these people who have come at her. I know for hours at a time. She has calmed me down when I've been upset about issues. We had that Highcroft meeting not a week later. Somebody phoned up and said, I'm sorry, our people couldn't walk 50 paces up the hill. Would you please bring your whole presentation, that model, all your people, assemble all the people, come to our laundry room and make a presentation on Highcroft. Vicky, is that accurate information?
Well, no, we're not going to have
anyhow. So what I'm trying to say is that I believe that the staff has been more than fair. They've treated me fairly. I don't think they're biased. They're not working for me. They're not on my payroll. Trust me. They have nothing to gain by putting themselves in this position of getting barraged by the public for my benefit. They're trying to interpret council policy as best they can. And the way I understand it, that policy dictates that heritage should be preserved and rules can be massaged to a point that allows some unique way of dealing with problems. And this is a unique site. It's a unique site. It's facing Highcroft apartment buildings. It's facing Highcroft Medical Tower. It's facing apartment buildings. It's on a busy corner where 30,000 cars pass by Granville and 16th. 16,000 cars pass by Marpole. 1,000 cars are circulating the Crescent every day. And people are worried about 16 townhouses. The real issue here, I think, is that people just don't want anybody else living in Shaughnessy. They can put up with 3 big houses and they don't care about the heritage necessarily at the end of the day. The heritage is not that important to them. At the end of the day, they just don't want densification of their neighborhood. People are scared of densification. Obviously, you guys are dealing with that on other matters too. And it's evident that people just are opposed to densification. You've got people in an 8-story high-rise across the street saying, I don't want development across the street. You've got people in an exact same situation in Highcroft that are living in a CD-zoned situation where there was a heritage house and they carved off property and they put in townhouses 20 or 30 years ago. People are very happy living in there. Some of them got up and spoke and said, we love living in there, but we don't want the same thing across the street. Does that make sense? I don't think so. I think that's just saying that I don't want anybody else in my neighborhood. I'm happy with what's there. You should keep it as low as density as you can, and that's that. And if that's, at the end of the day, what council feels is their directive and what should be done, and they don't really care about preserving the heritage, well, I guess direct me to do that, and I'll do my best to carry on with my options as best they are. But at the end of the day, my options are, I have 3 legal lots there with a house sitting in the middle of 2 of them. If I remove it, I can build 45,000 square feet of mega house, or somebody else can. And is that a better use of 2.3 acres in today's day and age? I don't think so. But if everybody else in the world thinks that I'm wrong, well, okay, tell me, and then we'll get on with it. But I don't see why I should carve off 2/3 of the development just as an appeasement to make everybody happy here and say I did something to try and make people happy. I've been trying to make people happy for 2.5 years. I had the original proposal of moving the house forward and 4 different houses and some townhouses at the bottom. Heritage people said no, the house is important the way it is in the middle of the garden. Preserve the garden, leave the house where it is. That's very important. So I said okay. So we condensed those 4 houses into 1 block. People said in the meetings it should have a mansion-like character, so it should look substantial. Well, we tried to make it substantial. Now it looks too substantial. We'll try and carve it up a bit if we can. But there has to be an end to this. I mean, I can only do so much. I can only be squeezed down so far, and I can only be pulled in so many directions. And at the end of the day, I don't think if any of you were in my position and you owned a very valuable piece of property in the city and this was your business, you'd be giving away the farm just to make people happy. At the end of the day, 45,000 square feet is what can be built on that property. And 45,000 square feet, whether it's a heritage house of 10,000 and 35,000 square feet of townhouse development, or if it's 3 mega houses, carve them up in equal quantity, and that's what you get. It's one or the other. I don't think there's anything else that's likely going to happen there, whether it's me or, as I said, whether it's the next guy. If I just get tired of this and walk away, as they've all been saying from day one, if you wear him out, maybe he'll just go away. Well, I might go away, but maybe there's another guy there who's not as sensitive to the heritage issues and might not care to preserve it. I care to preserve it. I live in Shaughnessy. I like it. I've done my best to preserve it. I live in a heritage house, so to speak, and I've done my best, and I feel that my conscience will be clear. Whatever you decide to do, whatever direction you tell me, I've done my best to satisfy the neighbors, the professional people, the planners, council, whoever has had a say in this. I've tried my hardest to make this a quality project. I've never been accused of building garbage or crap, and I don't plan to do this on something that's as high profile as this. My reputation is the most important thing to me, and I've always done my best to uphold that. So I'm hoping that at the end of the day, you'll agree with me. And I just have one quote that I wanted to read. I don't have a poem, I'm sorry, but I do have a quote. This was an article that I cut out some time ago. Robert Stern, who is a well-known architect, as you know, is doing some design work in Falls Creek. And he was here and he was talking about Vancouver, and he said something that I think is quite germane here. He says, one of the problems with master planning is that it doesn't allow for growth. This is the way it is. and it never changes. Cities are about growth and change, and over time they get younger populations or older populations, whatever. And if there isn't a way to change things or be flexible, then the whole thing just atrophies. And I firmly agree with that, and I firmly agree that we need to be adaptable and we need to adapt to the times and changes in demands and needs for housing. I'm trying to do a responsible job here as a developer. A developer, to me, is, there's good developers, there's bad developers, like every other profession, but I'm not a crack dealer here. I'm just a builder. I'm a developer. I'm trying to do a reasonable job, and that's the best I can offer you. And the rest, it's up to you to decide which direction I take. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Appreciate you listening to me, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Councillor Capri, do you have a question?
Well, just to clarify, are we to ask questions of the developer tonight or on the council meeting?
It has to be tonight.
Okay, I do have questions. Thank you. You didn't threaten us with voting. Just kidding. Don't answer that one.
I'd never do that.
It's interesting to me that a lot of people made comments about the passion for heritage. And I heard that from all of the folks in Shaughnessy that they're passionate about heritage. I heard that from you, and that's why you live there, and that's why you wanted to preserve the house. And yet your first proposal, as I'm understanding, and correct me because this is what I've heard, was to move the heritage house forward and develop the other two pieces. And yet the Heritage Commission says that heritage is in situ and it doesn't fit with the heritage. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. As everything, there's a compromise. I tried to consider what would be the most acceptable to the neighborhood to try and come up with a plan originally. And I thought to myself, okay, you've got a huge garden in the front, obviously a huge piece of valuable property. When you look at the ODP or the guidelines that allow for infill type developments, and there were proposals made before I bought the property from other people who looked at it. One of the former heritage planners for the city who was working on his own came up with a proposal that showed infill houses in the front yard, leaving the house where it was but putting infill in the front yard. Well, to me that destroys the character of the house. And so by moving the house forward, because it was such a huge setback on that house, and because the area in the middle was open, you could move that house without destroying the trees around it, the major trees, and you'd lose some lawn area, etc. But the actual look to the crescent would be the same. And that's the thing with this proposal. When you stand, if this went ahead and it was built, you could stand at that crescent and look at that house, and you'd never know there was anything down the hill at the corner of 16th and Granville. So it's really the corner of 16th and Granville that is upsetting people. Because there's nothing going on up at the crescent. You'd never notice there's any difference. If we moved the house forward, yes, there would be a different look, but it would be the original house that was sitting on that piece of property. So by moving that house forward, my initial thought was, okay, move the house forward, free up some of the other site area, and I had 4 infill houses, you might say, and then townhousing down below. So it kind of went from, and I always proposed, I never once proposed to carve that house up into multiple dwelling units, because if you read the First Shaughnessy guidelines, it says try and preserve the single family character of First Shaughnessy first and foremost. And that to me is important. And so I thought, okay, preserve that house. It's a huge house. It's 10,000 square feet. But somebody will want it. It's a huge old house. But somebody will take that house as single family. So keep it as single family, have little single family type infill houses, and then have some townhousing at 16th and Granville. Now certainly a busy corner like 16th and Granville, when you have some townhouses down there, why would that so upset people? Obviously, it's a very busy corner. You're facing other apartments. You're facing medical buildings, and I just don't understand it. I just don't see it.
Okay, so without going into the debate about why it would upset people, because I think there's going to be a lot said about that when we do go into debate, I heard overwhelmingly from people in First Shaughnessy that they preferred the option of move the house forward, develop the other lots. If we went right back to the beginning and said, that's kind of where we'd like to go, what would your response be?
My response would be, I have some flexibility in the plan. I was told in no uncertain terms that leaving the house in situ was very important, and that was part of the preservation of the heritage character of that property, and I shouldn't stray from that. So I didn't. That was my direction, and I went there. I stayed with that. That wasn't my first plan, obviously. We've said that, but I was told that that was important, and I said, okay, as long as I end up with that same density that was planned for overall, and I didn't ask for bonus density. I didn't ask for twice as much density on the overall site. I asked for the 0.45 density, and if I get that 0.45 density on that whole site, I'm happy. I'm just trying to do something that's different than 3 monster houses, which I don't think is the best use of that property. So I really don't have another 2.5 years left in me. I'm not that big that I can sit there with a large portion of my worth tied up in one single property and sit there for 2.5 years more redesigning, going through this process again. It's not fair, I don't think, to go back there, and I don't know whether the heritage people would support that. From my understanding, they wouldn't. So, again, I can only be pushed and pulled in so many directions. So what do I do?
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Chow.
Thank you, Your Worship, Ms. Bell.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm.
If you were given the same kind of model as Greencroft in terms of bonus density that you could transfer out of that lot, would that work for you?
Well, if you're talking about X amount of dollars, the same sort of dollars, transferring it to some other neighborhood, and leaving this alone, I don't know. I just don't think I don't think that's a practical thing to do. And after the Greencroft, one of the big things that the neighbors were upset about was the density transfer. So I didn't even go near that. I didn't even approach that. I mean, that was one of the main issues that most of the people were against, was density transfer, bonus density transfer. And as far as comparing Greencroft to McRae, they're two different animals. Greencroft was a large mansion that was carved up into multifamily, so a huge amount of money had to be spent on that to deal with it. They raised it up, they put parking underneath, they carved it up into multiple units, they infilled in the yard. It was a whole different type of project. And I was offered that project. I lived next door to it. I knew the woman that owned it. She was from Los Angeles, never lived there. She offered it to me umpteen times before it was sold on the market. And I refused it because I felt that I couldn't do a proper job keeping that as single family and doing something else with it. You couldn't move it on the site. It just didn't work. I mean, you heard one of the owners come up and read some speech that said, they made a mistake. It wasn't right. So, I mean, I didn't do it because I couldn't make sense of it. But to compare Greencroft to McRae, two different animals.
Well, I'm not comparing. I'm just saying, in order to make it work, I believe this kind of, heritage conservation actually has to be flexible, even on council's part, in terms of bonus density transfer, in terms of moving the house. I'm certainly of the opinion that the house can be moved, but of course you're saying the Heritage Commission was not of the same opinion, so I guess everybody has their opinion. Yes. Mm-hmm. But I would think to make it work, and I think we have heard enough from the residents that there should be a solution somewhere. I mean,
well, I felt I'd offered a solution, and we've spent a lot of time and effort trying to appease everyone and every stakeholder. We had co-design meetings, and design by committee is really tough. I mean, everybody has an opinion. We'd go around the room at those co-design meetings, and everybody would have a different opinion. You go around again, they'd have a different opinion. And I think Councillor Ladner said one of these meetings he couldn't understand why, if this got support at the beginning of the proposal, why all of a sudden it had such opposition. Well, it's like trying to hold water in your hands for a certain period of time. You can hold that water initially, but the longer you try and hold it, it's just seeping away from you. And when you lose momentum on something, it's really hard to get it back. All you need is one clever guy who starts a website and starts dispensing information over the website that's totally opposed to you. I mean, I don't know how you people would feel if you were running for re-election and had your opposition hosting your website and dispensing information on a one-way basis. It's difficult to counteract that in today's world. All you have to do is push a button and everybody gets that information. It's a whole new world.
Thank you, Councillor Gill.
Thank you. Just to ask a question about the impermeability and imperviousness of the site. I understand that the overall number is I'm sorry about this. I'm getting the
35%.
35%, and that's because it's lower than that on the primary site and up to 66, 62.
So you're talking about the FSR versus the actual.
I'm talking about the imperviousness. I'm talking about the coverage of the land with impermeable material on the other two sites that are going to have the townhouses. That's up over 60%. Is that correct? No. That's the FSR. That's over 60%.
Material.
Now, but I thought that was for the whole site combined, including taking into account the rose garden.
Both the first shot, the heritage site and the CD1 site would meet the under 35%
individually
when they're all done individually.
Okay, well then that takes care of that question. Thank you.
Okay, so I am going to recess this meeting until adjourn. Oh, okay, yes. I'm going to adjourn this public hearing, and we will move the debate, discussion, and decision to the next council meeting. Would that be the right on Tuesday?
On Tuesday?
Okay, council. Okay, conclude the public hearing portion of the meeting. Refer staff summation, discussion, decision to April 1st regular meeting of council. Motion to rise from the committee of the whole. Councillor Capri moves. All in favor. All opposed. Passed unanimously. Do I need to adopt the no? We don't adopt the report of the committee. Adopt the report of the committee. Councillor Ladner moves. Councillor Anton seconds. All in favor.